Hey you guys, it's Loaf, and I'm back with another Last Epoch build guide. This time we're going to be doing the Witchfire Warlock. There's been a lot of changes with Warlock recently. There was a lot of bugs that were being abused in order to give Warlock kind of infinite ward scaling and infinite damage scaling. All of those have been fixed, and it left a lot of my viewers asking for different ways to maybe play Warlock. Right now, really the only meta is playing Torment Warlock or some various weird kind of abusing kind of detonate dead type play styles with sacrifice. And so they were looking for a little bit of a different way to play Warlock that's still fun and can still do decently well. And that's what I try to do with the Witchfire Warlock. So pros, it is really fun. It's very easy to play. It's mostly just a, drop a Fissure walking simulator. And it kind of handles all the aiming and everything for you. And it's very visually appealing. Warlock's got some of the coolest looking spells in the game, in my opinion. And I loved playing it. I just had a blast all the way through leveling to endgame. It was a really good time. The cons for the build, it is a little bit squishier. You can't scale, 80k ward anymore. So it's not going to be face tanking high-end content. As well as it won't push, super high corruption. It's still going to easily be able to get over 500 corruption, which is where I think a majority of the players are sitting, and honestly is the ideal spot to be farming. If you're trying to get the most loot per hour, you want to typically be in that like 5 to 700 window, which it should do no problem. It's just not going to be, in the thousands of corruption, so I just want to set realistic expectations for the build. Now, I am going to have different planners. There are quite a few uniques that I'm using with the build, but I am going to have an entire setup without using a single unique that is still fully functional and can get you, to level 100. So don't worry if you don't have any of the uniques, you'll still have something to fall back to, as well as I'll have an early leveling stage. The early leveling planner is to take you from level 1 until you hit the Warlock Ascendancy, and then once you have that, you can switch over to the version without the uniques to finish out your leveling experience. I will also have in-depth planner or in-depth loot filters for you guys, so I'll just have one that will take you from level 1 to 100, and I'll go into that more on the later end of the video. There'll be timestamps available for that. The other thing I do want to mention is before you switch to the endgame setup, you do need to have a Firestarter's Torch weapon, and it needs to have the minus mana cost slammed on top of it. If you don't have that, then you're not going to be able to sustain the mana, so just stick with the non-unique version of the build until you get to that point. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the build guide. If you do, I would consider, leaving a like on the video. It helps the algorithm, helps push me out to more viewers, or maybe consider subscribing if you like to see my content and would like to come back and see future builds I make. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the build guide. Alrighty guys, to start us off, we're going to go with the leveling planner here. I'm going to browse through this pretty quickly. Now, we're going to have the sliding bars for all of the skills and passives. That way you can see what to take and where. Also, the original passive skills in the tree are going to line up perfectly with the non-unique build planner for you. So that way you can just transition without having to respec any of the actual passive points themselves. You'll just have to respec some of the skills to kind of get you going. So to start us off, we're going to go over the skills here first. So the first skill we're going to be using is Summon Skeleton. Now, don't worry too much there. It's not going to be a minion focus like leveling setup or anything like that. This is just going to synergize very well with the second skill that we're going to be using for leveling. So it's still going to mainly be spell oriented. There's just a lot of support that Summon Skeleton can give us. So to start out, how Summon Skeleton works is it will summon a random skeleton for you. It can either be a warrior or an archer skeleton, and it will go up to 3 total skeletons. So it will always give you 2 of one of the skeletons and 1 of the other. If you have 2 warriors and 1 archer, and you click Summon Skeleton again, it'll get rid of one of your warriors and give you 2 archers instead. So whatever combo you'd like there. Now to start off the tree, we're going to be putting the first 3 points into Unholy Rage. What this does is it will give the archers and the warriors a 15% increase attack speed and 15% movement speed to help them keep up with you. Then we'll be putting 1 point into Lone Guardian as a travel point here. It will also give them 30% increased critical strike chance, and then it will limit your warriors to 1, so you will always have 2 archers and 1 warrior. And then we'll be going to Mightier Than the Sword. What this does is it removes the warriors from the summon pool, so now you can only summon a summon archer. So it's going to give you 3 ranged minions. The ranged minions tend to have a lot better AI. They're not having to constantly move over to enemies to try to attack them. So it's going to give you a much higher damage uptime for them and be a lot easier to kind of control. After that, we'll be taking the 2 points into Necrotic Conviction. This will give your archers 30% increased damage. And then the remaining points will go into Marotap. That's going to give all your archers 2% health leech, so that way they can kind of self-sustain and stop you from having to resummon them on a regular basis. Now, for the second skill, we'll be using Hungering Souls. And as we start going through the passives, it'll make a lot more sense while we have to summon skeletons. So Hungering Souls is a really easy skill to level with because it auto-aims for you. You kind of just cast in the general direction. It's going to sum out these little souls, and they're going to home in on the enemies. They're going to do flat spell damage to them, as well as they're going to possess them, which makes them take necrotic damage over time. Now, for the first 3 points, we're going to be putting it into Ravenous. That's going to give us 18 flat necrotic damage on hit. That is a lot of flat damage, especially early on in the game. Your typical level 1 wand gives you 3 flat damage. So this is already beating that out by a very large margin. After the 3 points in there, we're going to be putting 1 travel point into Great Bond. It will also give us 15% more multiplicative damage with Hungering Souls. And then here's where the summoned skeletons come into play. We're going to be taking the 3 points into Unholy Trinity. This is probably in top 3 or to 5 highest damage nodes out of any skill out there. The only one I can think of off the top of my head that beats it is Smite, which does 250. But this is going to make souls deal 150% more multiplicative damage if you have exactly 3 minions. Now, if you remember with the summoned skeletons, they only go up to 3 minions. You can never have more than that. So it's kind of the perfect segue to aid us with the Unholy Trinity setup. And that is going to make the Hungering Souls do an absurd amount of damage early on, making the early leveling phase very easy. After that, we'll be grabbing the 2 points into Reaper Gaze. That's going to give you a 10% kill threshold. So anytime a monster is below 10% health, they're just going to be instantly executed. This does work on bosses as well. And then it's going to give us access to the last point of Dominion of Undeath. That's going to take out 2 of the mana cost. Hungering Souls does have a pretty hefty mana cost early on, so it's 11 mana. You get -3 mana cost from using a wand early, and then that other -2. So that's going to take off 5 of the mana cost, almost half of it. That should help with the spamming of Hungering Souls quite a bit. And then that will wrap up the early leveling skills for us. You should only have the 2 slots there before you unlock Warlock. Alright, next up we're going to be going over the passives. Like I said before, this is going to be the exact same setup for the non-unique version of the build, so there shouldn't be any respecking needed on the actual passive points for you. Once you unlock Warlock, you can just keep progressing with the points. So there are going to be sliders down here as well for you, so you can see the order in which we're taking everything. So the first 8 points is going to go into Forbidden Knowledge. That's going to give us 8 Intelligence. Intelligence is going to scale damage of Hungering Souls, as well as scaling the damage and health for your minions, as well as giving us 40% Necrotic Res for free, which is pretty good early on. After that, we'll be taking the 8 points into Stolen Vitality. Vitality gets you extra HP, as well as increasing your minion health by 72% to help them stay alive. And then the remaining points will go into Blood Aura for the increased damage to yourself and your minions. After that, it will give us access to Warlock. I typically would recommend transitioning after your first 5 points into Warlock, because that's going to give you access to Chaos Bolts, which will help the build synergize a lot better. So then you can unspec both the Summoned Skeletons and the Hungering Souls for your Fissure and the Chaos Bolts. But the first 5 points are going to go into Soul Stealer. The reason being is the 5-point bonus there. You gain a chance per curse on the enemy to gain mana on hit. So we are going to be stacking a whole bunch of curses throughout this build, and this is going to be the main source of mana sustain for you. There's going to be so many small little hits that are going off at a time that it's going to help you stay topped up on your mana pool. And then after you get to that point, that is when I would switch over to the other build planner and start following those passives, change over your skills to Fissure and Chaos Bolts, and then just continue with the rest of the guide. I did briefly want to go over the leveling gear though. So I did it without any idols or blessings. Early on, the base item doesn't really matter all that much. I just chose very low level bases to give you an idea of kind of what to look for. So if you find a higher level base than like a skull cage, if you have like a death mask or a witch hat, any of these are fine and they're probably going to be upgrades. I just did a low end base for each of the items just to kind of give you an idea to what to look for early on. As far as the stats go, we're mainly going for intelligence and vitality on the prefixes, as you should have quite a plethora of those shards. If you've been playing even for a little bit, those are very common shards and easy to craft. That way you're not wasting anything valuable on your leveling gear. So on the helmet, we have intelligence, vitality, and resistance. On the amulet, I am going to put mana regen there as the main prefix. For the other prefix, you can put spell damage, you can put minion damage, necrotic damage, fire damage, any of that will work. So necrotic damage will be used for hungering souls early on. However, once you switch over to Warlock, we'll be mainly focusing on fire damage. So just so you guys know kind of where to transition your stats. But I just put mana regen on there, so that way it's a little bit easier to sustain the early on mana. For the offhand, we're just looking for cast speed and then any other generic damage modifiers such as spell damage, fire damage, and whatnot with some resistance. For the chest piece, we're looking for intelligence, vitality, and res. Now, for the weapon, I did put in a unique weapon here. This is a very, very common unique weapon. I probably drop this on my character 50% of the time that I play Acolyte. If you've played any other characters up till this point in the cycle, you probably have one of these laying around. The reason why I'm using it is it is a wand. It gives us that minus mana cost. It gives us flat spell damage. But this will drastically make the sustain on the minions much easier to maintain. So it gives your minions up to 120% increase bow attack damage, and then it also lets them leech 10% of the damage dealt by their bow attacks as health. So that would be a lot more leech. They should almost never die except maybe on some boss fights if they're standing in AoE. So this is just a really good budget option. If you don't have this wand, just recommend any wand. And then you're looking for the highest base damage possible. So you see here it says 4 to 6 spell damage. This one's 12 to 16. So whichever one just has the highest base damage is typically what you're going to want to use. I will include all these wands in the filter as well, so you can find them and pick them up if you want. But if you have a Reach of Grave, I just use that. It'd be a lot easier. For the rings, we're looking for intelligence. You can get mana regen on them. You get resistances. Any of that will do. On the belt, we're looking for mana regen, health, and res. If you have hybrid health shards, that's a really easy way to boost up your survivability while leveling. Same thing with this ring. For the relic, we're looking for the mana regen and res. The boots, try to focus on getting movement speed over everything else. It'll make your leveling experience a lot smoother. And then you can also get hybrid health on the boots along with some res. And then for the gloves, we're looking for that intelligence, hybrid health, and res. But you don't have to have these stats exactly. Just try to get as close as you can to capping your res early on. Early on in the game, the two biggest damage types you're going to be taking are going to be physical and void damage. So I'd focus on those two first, and then you're going to want to start bolstering out your LE res and your necrotic res. You don't take a ton of poison damage throughout the campaign until much later on. So those should typically be the order in which you focus things on. But that's going to wrap up the leveling portion of the planner. I just wanted to quickly go over that so you kind of have a base understanding on how to set things up and have a little bit of a smoother journey at the very beginning for you. All right, so next up, I'm going to go over the non-unique setup. This is where you can kind of transition after that early leveling planner. If you do happen to already have all of the different uniques that are going to be showcased in the build, you can go ahead and just skip to the timestamp where it goes over the endgame setup. However, this I think will be a more natural progression for a lot of the players if you're just making a warlock and you don't have a lot of gear already in your stash. So we'll start off with the skills here, and then when I do go over the endgame setup, I'm not going to go over the skills and passives in as much detail. I'm mainly just going to go over the changes from this original setup. So we'll go over the skills first, that we get a base understanding for how everything scales and what we're looking for. And it'll make more sense when we're going over the passives and the gear and how that ties back in. So for the first skill, we have Chthonic Fissure. What this does is it opens up a fissure into the ground, dealing fire damage over time, and then it starts releasing these little spirits that go out and they will home in on enemies and attack them. These spirits will apply a curse called Torment that deals necrotic damage over time. So that's kind of how the base fissure works. What we will be changing how some of the core functionality works with the skill as well. So like everything else, we have the slider bars here to show you the early progression. So the first point we're going to put into Fragile Crust. What this will do is take off 4 flat mana costs of the skill itself, as well as it will refund 6% of the mana cost of Fissure. Next 2 points we're going to put into Fellfire. So tormenting an ignited enemy spreads all of your ignite stacks from it to a number of other enemies around it. So once you've applied your ignites, which we'll get into later, that's going to be a big core aspect of the damage for this build. The little spirits that are shooting out of your fissures, they'll automatically start spreading your ignites to all nearby enemies. That's really what's going to help out the AoE clear. That way you're not having to build up a whole bunch of ignite stacks on each enemy. And then after that, for the next setup here, we'll be putting the 2 points into Stygian Current. This is going to increase the frequency at which those spirits come out of Fissure by 20%. And then we're going to be getting to the core part of the build. So we're going to put the 3 points into Chaotic Rupture. Now what that does is it gives you a chance that the spirits that are coming out of Fissure are going to be replaced by Chaos Bolts instead, which will be our second skill that we go over. And then that does consume 60% of the base mana cost of the Chaos Bolts. And then it does also reduce the chance for doing extra projectiles. We're not going to be doing any of that with our Chaos Bolts, so that part doesn't matter. So you're still going to be having spirits coming out, so it's still going to be able to spread your ignites, but a good chunk of your spirits are now going to be Chaos Bolts, which are going to hit a lot harder and going to help us apply our ignites for the build. After we've grabbed the 3 points in there, we're going to put in the additional points into Fragile Crust for the additional reduced mana cost and mana refund. This is going to be a pretty mana intensive build, especially early on until you get a couple items that help fix that. So we want to get as much mana reduction as we can early on, especially where we get into our next point. So after you put the 3 points into Fragile Crust, you're going to put 1 point into Of Gloom and Flames. What this does is instead of creating one fissure, it's still kind of one fissure, but basically what it does is it doubles the length of the fissure. So now it covers almost the entire screen, and it casts its own spirits, which then get turned into Chaos Bolts. So it's about twice as much damage. You have twice as many Chaos Bolts coming out, twice as many fissures, and you're just having more screen coverage. And then it increases the mana cost by 80%. So we're saving essentially 20% mana of getting 2 fissures out. After we've put the points into there, we're going to put 2 points into Death from Above. Chthonic Fissure now deals more damage multiplicative with other modifiers, so that damage increase actually applies to everything that's being cast from the fissure itself. So it does increase the damage of our ignites that are going to be coming out from the Chaos Bolts that are cast from Fissure. And then next we'll be putting the 3 points into Eradication. So it's going to do kind of the same thing as the previous node, except this is going to be specified towards rare and bosses. It's going to give you an extra 24% multiplicative damage, and then that number is doubled if the enemy is cursed. And then I also forgot that does also apply from Death from Above. So instead of 10%, it's going to be 20% damage. Pretty much every enemy we hit is going to have a multitude of curses on them, so you're always going to be benefiting from that double damage from these 2 nodes. Next, we'll be finishing out the Stygian Current for the increased frequency of our spirits and Chaos Bolts in turn. And then we will be putting 1 point into Mantle of Flames. What that's going to do is it's going to apply your ignite chance as the overall ignite chance per second for Fissure. So if you cast a Fissure directly on top of an enemy, which you'll typically do for bosses, it's going to start applying your ignite chance, as well as it will also have its own ignite chance per second. So you have 50% there. And then that's going to cap us out for the 20 points. If you do happen to get a modifier on your chest piece that allows you to have extra levels, For the non-unique setup, I would just finish putting them out into Mantle of Flames. So now it's giving 300% of your ignite chance, and then having its own 150% chance for ignite per second, just allowing you to get a lot more ignites on enemies. And then that will wrap up the Chthonic Fissure skill for you. For our second skill, as we've kind of talked about in the previous one, is going to be Chaos Bolts. So what Chaos Bolt does is it's a barrage of chaotic projectiles which land in an area around the target, and then the explosion deals both necrotic and fire damage in a small area. So that's the skill as a base. Now, for the leveling progression, we're going to be putting the first 5 points into Mania in Flames. What that does is it gives the Chaos Bolts a 100% chance to ignite. There is going to be a ludicrous amount of Chaos Bolts, as you guys saw in the intro, coming out from Chthonic Fissure, and all of those individual projectiles are going to have that 100% ignite chance. Next, we will be putting 1 point into Abrupt Chaos for now. What that will do is give you increased cast speed and projectile speed for Chaos Bolts. Most of the Chaos Bolts you're going to be summoning are going to be automatically cast through Fissure. However, in single target scenarios where you're doing big bosses, you will be self-casting them, so having a little bit of extra cast speed is nice. And then next we'll be putting 1 point for now into Doom's Vindication. What that does is it causes your Chaos Bolts to deal more damage to cursed enemies. Like I was saying before, that's going to be all the time. And it's going to give you a bonus to hit damage, but the regular damage percentage there is going to apply to the ailments that Chaos Bolt gives. So our ignite chance is going to get that 4% multiplicative damage as well. After that, we'll be putting 2 points into Devoured the Dam. So Chaos Bolt's hits against cursed enemies regain health and mana. So it's going to give you actually a lot of health sustain and help with the mana issues as well. So it's going to give you 12 health back every time a Chaos Bolt hits, which is a whole bunch of times, as well as the 2 mana. After that, you're going to be grabbing the point to Seed of Chaos. What this does is when Chaos Bolt hits a cursed enemy, it has a chance for you to recast the Chaos Bolts again. So it has a 10% chance for another Chaos Bolt to just come back out of the fissure and hit another target. So that's basically just 10% more damage, and then it's going to use 80% of Chaos Bolt's mana instead of the 100%. For that next point, we're going to be putting it into Cursed Blood. What this does is Chaos Bolt is going to refresh the duration of all your curses, and it's going to give you health per curse. We're having a whole bunch of curses, so it's going to be way more than 6 health for each time it hits each enemy. So it's going to be quite a bit of sustain from this node, as well as making sure those curses don't fall off the targets if they're a tankier target. After that, we'll be finishing off the rest of the points into Doom's Vindication for the extra multiplicative damage going up to 16%. We'll be finishing out the Abrupt Chaos nodes for 12% cast speed for those single target scenarios. And then it's not going to make a lot of sense right now, but we'll get into it later into the passive tree. But we are going to grab the Condemned to Chaos nodes, which is going to give us some Damn chance as well. Damned is another ailment similar to Ignite, except it does necrotic damage over time. We're going to have an ability that we get in our passive tree later on that does half fire damage over time and half necrotic damage over time. So just having the extra little Damn chance is a nice little buffer to the damage. There's not really any other nodes that makes sense for Chaos Bolt with this current setup. There is a little bit of a change on the tree once we get into some of the unique gear, but for right now we're not low life, so this wouldn't make any sense. We're not doing hit damage, so this wouldn't make any sense. The rest of these are like conversion abilities, and we don't want to convert any of the damage. We want it to be fire necrotic damage, so that doesn't really make sense. The only other points you could really put it into would be Pandemonium for the extra area of effect, which we will utilize more once we have some of our unique gear, and some of these other nodes don't make as much sense. But I think the Condemned to Chaos will actually give you the most benefit, just amplifying that damage output a little bit. And then that will wrap up the Chaos Bolt skill tree. Now for the third skill, we're going to be using Transplant. This is our movement ability. It's kind of like the mage's teleport. So it basically teleports you forward to wherever your cursor is. And instead of the skill costing mana, it actually costs health. So it's going to cost 13% of your current health every time you cast this ability. Don't worry about that too much. We're going to have some sustain in the passive tree, as well as all the sustain from Chaos Bolts. You should instantly heal back the health cost there, so don't worry too much about that. Now, For the first two nodes, we're going to be putting them into Acolyte's Fervor. What it's going to do is after we cast our Transplant, it's going to give us Haste and Frenzy for 2 seconds. So Haste gives us 30% movement speed for those 2 seconds, and then Frenzy gives us 20% increased cast speed. That's going to be nice on those single target scenarios when we're spam casting Chaos Bolts. Next, we'll be putting 1 travel point into Azure Veins. What that does is it's going to give a little bit more of your health percent there as the mana cost for the ability. So 0.5% of your total health pool, or sorry, not your total health pool, but your current health that you have, which should be typically your total health pool, as the mana cost, as well as you're going to lose 0.5% of your ward. You won't notice that at all. And then after that, we're going to be grabbing the 3 points into Pale Blood. So what that's going to do is Transplant now gives you 30 flat mana every time you use it. That's going to help a lot with the mana sustain. So if the procs for the various mana sources from Chaos Bolt in your passive tree aren't enough, or you're spamming a little bit more than you typically would, you can use Transplant to help recover a good chunk of that mana. It does also increase the cooldown of the skill itself, but will help fix some of that later on. All right, next we'll be taking the 1 point Defleeting Form. That's going to increase the cast speed of Transplant, as well as give you some of the cooldown recovery speed that you lost here. We'll be putting 2 travel points into Anemia. What that's going to do is reduce the overall health cost of Transplant by 16%. And then the big note here is Bone Armor. Whenever you use Transplant, you are granted Bone Armor for 4 seconds, which grants you armor and less damage taken. So it's going to give you 300 armor by default, and then it's going to make you take a 12% less damage for those 4 seconds. So it's just a really good defensive option, as well as just having all the utility for the mana that Transplant gives us. All right, for these next nodes, we're going to put the 3 points into Apostasy. What that's going to do is increase the bone armor by 3 seconds. So instead of lasting 4 seconds, it's now going to last 7 seconds. And then the 2 points after that are going to be Plated Bone. So now the bone armor is 20% more effective. So that's going to be the 20% increased effect on the less damage taken, as well as the overall armor that it's giving us. All right, for the next 2 nodes, we're going to put 1 travel point into Rain of Blood. So Transplant by default creates a small little explosion. And so that's going to add an additional detonation upon arrival. It doesn't really do anything for this build though. The next point that we're going to be going to is Doombringer. What this is going to do is you're going to automatically cast Bone Curse around the target location after you arrive. Bone Curse is an ability that we are going to get into later as our last skill. That's going to give us a bunch of utility, but this is going to help stop us from having to manually cast it too often. It's just going to be automatically cast for us whenever we use our movement skill, and it's going to cover a good majority of the screen. So it's a great utility there. And then for the last point, we're going to be going into Acolyte's Fervor to increase the duration of the Haste and Frenzy. And then that will wrap up our movement skill, Transplant. For the 4th skill, we're going to be going into Wandering Spirits. Now, this, I know for a lot of people, is not going to make a lot of sense when you first look at it. It's like, okay, why are we using this weird necrotic skill that's kind of a minion skill, but not really? So we'll get into it. This is actually more of a utility skill and is not used for damage in any way. So what Wandering Spirits does by default is you click it, and then these spirits will start appearing around you for 6 seconds. And as they wander around, they'll do necrotic damage over time for any enemies that they pass through. And then after the duration of when they appeared, they will just expire and poof out of thin air there. Now, the reason why the skill is going to be good is for the node up here, Infusing Souls. So you have a chance to gain mana whenever a spirit expires. So it's going to give you 12 mana every single time one of those spirits expires. So you're basically just going to be casting this ability on cooldown. So to kind of go through the leveling progress, we're going to be putting 3 points into Soul of Rage. This is just a filler skill there, so it's going to help increase their movement speed and their damage. Doesn't really matter all that much. Then we're going to be putting the 1 point into Medium. That's going to give us 5% cast speed and mana efficiency of the skill, because it does cost 31 mana. In 3 spirits from the Infusing Souls, it's already going to cover that, as well as we're going to reduce the mana cost more later on. Then you'll be grabbing the 1 travel point to Sheltering Spirits. It's going to give you ward whenever they expire. On the non-unique version of the build, we're going to be health stacking, so that doesn't really matter. And then we'll be grabbing the Infusing Souls that we talked about earlier in order to give you that mana chance there whenever the spirits expire. After that, we'll be putting the 5 points into Thin Veil. What this is going to do is it's basically going to increase the amount of spirits that are being summoned by 35%. So 35% more spirits, which means you're going to have 35% more mana being gained from this skill. After that, we'll be grabbing the 3 points into Spirit Swarm for the 30% cooldown recovery. The more it's off cooldown, the more mana we're getting back from it. And then for the next points, we're going to be filling out the medium here just to reduce the mana cost even further from Wandering Spirits and increasing that cast speed, making it go off a lot smoother. And then honestly, there's nowhere else to really put the points there, so I just put it into Soul's Rage. It's going to give the spirits more movement speed. It's going to make them do a little bit more damage. There really isn't a whole lot else we can take. Everything else kind of synergizes more with necrotic or poison damage over time. You just absolutely do not want to put them into Lingering Souls because that's going to make the spirits last longer, which means it's going to take longer for you to get your mana back. And that's going to kind of wrap up Wandering Spirits. This is one of the skills that we're going to transition out of once you do get one of the uniques with a proper legendary slam. That's going to kind of solve all our mana issues, but this is kind of the band-aid fix for that to just kind of help level out your mana, keep you up full most of the time. That way you're not having too many times when you're just completely out of mana. Alrighty, and then for the final skill for this setup, we have Bone Curse. So what this does is applies a curse to enemies in an area for 8 seconds that causes them to take physical damage when hit. Obviously, we're not doing physical damage, but there's some different nodes we can take in this tree that's going to give us a lot of utility, as well as this does count as another curse for us. So this is we only have 2 curses from our skills themselves. So we have the curse coming from Chthonic Fissure from the Wandering Spirits, and then we have Bone Curse. Those are all going to come into play later on when we get to the passive tree, where we're going to get bonuses for how many curses we have on a target. So to level out this skill, we're going to start off by putting 4 points into Conflation. That's going to increase the area of effect for Bone Spirit. It's what's going to make it cover like a good majority of the screen whenever it's cast, either from you or from Transplant. That's 120% increased area. The main reason why we're grabbing those is to get the 1 point into Sigil of Mortality. This is the main reason we're using Bone Curse. So Bone Curse now applies Mark for Death for 2 seconds. And what Mark for Death does is it makes enemies have 25% less resistances. So that's going to make all of your ignites hit way, way harder. So there's only a few ways in the game that you can apply for Mark for Death, and this is just a really easy way to get access to that. Alright, so next up, we're going to be putting 1 travel point into Defiled Defenses. It gives you a little bit of armor shred chance. Most of our damage is from damage over time. Armor does not apply to damage over time for enemies, so this isn't going to affect us in any way. We'll be putting 2 more travel points into Iron Maiden. It's going to increase the bone armor curse damage, which does not matter. And then the other really cool part that we get from Bone Curse is we're putting the 3 points into Brittled Bones. What that does is it gives Bone Curse a kill threshold. So if an enemy has Bone Curse on them and they go below 12% health, they just instantly die. As soon as they take another hit while Bone Curse is on them, they just die. So it's going to be much more reliable than any other kind of kill threshold because they're going to have Bone Curse on them pretty much the entire time, especially on like pinnacle bosses, which this will apply to as well. So really cool utility there. Next, we're going to be putting 1 more travel point to Defiled Defenses so we can get the 3 points into Marrow Thief. So what this is going to do is if you kill an enemy that's affected by Bone Curse, you get a chance to gain Bone Armor. So Bone Armor is the same thing that we got from Transplant. However, it's not quite 100% uptime from Transplant. So this is going to help fill out those gaps when we don't have it available. So whenever we kill an enemy with Bone Curse or with Bone Curse on them, it's going to give us the Bone Armor for 4 additional seconds. Then we'll be putting the 4 points into Reaper's Mark. That's going to increase the duration of Mark for Death by 200%. So it only lasts by default 2 seconds, which isn't very long. So this is going to give us a much higher uptime of that. And then for the last point, we're just going to put 1 point into Crippling Anguish. That's going to apply slow to any target that has Bone Curse on it, which should be a majority of them, just making it harder for them to ever really get to you in range. And then that's going to wrap up all of our skills. Like I said, I'm going to be going over the skill changes later on, as there's quite a few. We're going to be dropping these last two skills in the unique version of the build, as well as making adjustments to the other three skills as well. So make sure to hit those timestamps once you do have access to all of the unique pieces of gear, which we'll be going over in just a second. Alrighty guys, now that we've gone over all of these skills and you get a base understanding on how everything scales and the different abilities that we're going to be using in our toolkit, I'm going to break down the passive nodes and how those interact with the class. So this first part, like I said earlier, is going to be exactly like the leveling planner. That way you don't have to respec anything and make any other changes other than the skills themselves. So I'm going to very briefly go over these as we've already gone through them before, but just in case somebody skipped to this timestamp, I'll quickly go over that. So the first 8 points is going into Forbidden Knowledge for the +8 intelligence and 40% necrotic res. It's giving us more damage and extra res for free. We'll be putting 8 points into Stolen Vitality for the increased health. And then the remaining 4 points is going into Blood Aura for the 24% increased damage. And then that will be all of the necessary passives we need for the Acolyte skill tree to give us access to the Warlock skill tree. Now, like we talked about earlier on the leveling planner, the first 5 points are going into Soul Stealer. This is probably the most important node in the entire tree for us. So it gives us that 20% increased mana regen, as well as giving us the 5-point bonus where you gain a chance per curse on the enemy to gain mana on hit. This effect has a 3-second cooldown. So what happens is you get a 13% chance per curse to gain 13 mana on hit. Like we had talked about in the skills, we're already having the Torment Curse, which is automatically being applied when you use Fissure. And then we have the Bone Curse that we're going to be casting. So that's already two different curses that are going to be on the target, giving us 26% chance to gain that mana. We are going to get a whole bunch more curses as we go through the passive tree, so just keep that in mind. For the next 8 points, we're going to be putting them into Chaos Flames. What this is going to do is give us increased fire damage and ignite chance with fire skills, as well as increased necrotic damage and damned chance with necrotic skills. So damned is that necrotic damage over time ailment we talked about earlier on the Chaos Bolt tree. Now, it's really important to keep in mind that both Chthonic Fissure and Chaos Bolt are dual elements. So they are both a necrotic skill and a fire skill. So we're already going to be scaling a lot of just generic damage over time. So having the increased dam chance as well is not bad at all. So it's going to be some extra damage that's being layered on there for us. Now, the other thing I did want to go over, as I'm sure people who are newer to Last Epoch and have never scaled ailments before in Last Epoch are wondering why we're stacking so much ignite chance when Chaos Bolt is already giving us 100% chance to ignite every time it hits. So it works a little bit differently in Last Epoch. So let's say, for example, I have a skill that has 150% chance to ignite. What that will do is it's going to be a guaranteed chance for 1 stack of ignite. And then that extra 50% chance is going to give us a 50% chance to apply a second stack of ignite. So you want to really get as much chance to apply whatever ailment it is that you are stacking. Now, after that, we're going to be grabbing 2 points into Spiteful Decay. We'll be grabbing more of those later on, but that's going to give us access to this row right here, in which we'll be placing our 6 points into Spirit Leech. Spirit Leech is a very special node because it says a portion of the damage you do is returned to you as health over 3 seconds. There are very, very few sources in the game that will give you Leech based on a damage over time ailment. Almost all the Leech in the game is based on hit damage. This Leech, it will apply for all of our ignites and all of our dam chance or any other damage over time that we're doing. So it gives us 1.5 as generic, and then 1.5 against cursed enemies, which is going to be all of them. So we're getting 3% of the overall damage we're doing back to us over 3 seconds. After that, we'll be finishing out the extra 3 points into Spiteful Decay, so we can get the 5-point bonus from it. So you'll deal more damage over time to cursed enemies. So it's just 4% more multiplicative damage for all of our damage over time. After that, we'll be grabbing 1 point for now into Harrowing Armor. That's going to give us access to this row right here, in which case we're going to be grabbing the 5 points into Infernal Lash. Infernal Lash is going to give us an additional 65% ignite chance, And then also it's going to give us the 5-point bonus. So when you cast a fire skill and enemies within 15 meters have a combined 25 or more stacks of ignite, you strike up to 3 nearby ignited enemies with Flame Whip. It's just a big whip that comes out from the ground and hits them. It can also apply its own ignite since it's a fire skill coming out. And you gain Ignite Overload for 12 seconds. Now, what Ignite Overload does is it will consume the 25 stacks of Ignite. However, it'll give you 1% more fire damage to enemies per 20% Ignite chance that you have. And that counts global Ignite. So any kind of Ignite chance that you have is going to be added as a more multiplicative damage source for fire damage. And then next, the real synergistic part of the build here, the really cool thing that I maybe want to make this build is this point here, the Ashen ones. We're going to put 5 points into here. It's going to give us increased necrotic damage and increased elemental damage, which will apply to our ignites and our damned damage. And then we get the 5-point bonus that when you gain Ignite Overload or Damned Overload, all ignited and damned enemies within 15 meters are inflicted with Witchfire for 12 seconds. So Witchfire is a ailment that by default is going to do 300 fire damage and 300 necrotic damage over time. So each second is doing 600 damage there, fire and then necrotic respectively. And it only stacks one time, but to give you an example, I believe Ignite is a base damage of 30. So we're going from a 30 base damage over time ability to a 300 base damage ability there. And then this is also going to be scaling with all of our increases to fire damage, all of our increases to necrotic damage. All of that is going to add to make this massive dot do even more damage. After that, we're going to be grabbing 5 points into Dark Protections. Now it's going to give us some ward per second. For this version of the build, we aren't really stacking ward. However, the 5-point bonus is really nice. So you take less damage multiplicative with other modifiers per unique curse on the target. So it's 2% less damage per curse. We've already gone over 2 of the curses earlier, and then we'll be getting into more of those later on. So same thing as the Soul Stealer. These two just really scale well the more curses we're adding on targets. Next up, we'll be grabbing the 5 points into Fleeting Crone. This is just going to make the build feel a lot smoother. So you have a chance to gain haste for 2 seconds when you kill a cursed enemy or hit a cursed boss or rare enemy. Additionally, haste on you has increased effect. So we have a 25% chance to gain on kill and a 25% chance when we hit a boss or rare enemy. This is going to be up all the time. As long as you have a fissure on the ground and there is an enemy somewhere on the screen, our Fissure and our Chaos Bolts being procced by Fissure are hitting so fast and so often, we have 100% haste uptime basically, and we're increasing our haste effect by 50%. So just a massive movement speed multiplier. It's going to make the build feel really smooth and easy to run around with. Next up, we're going to be grabbing the 5 points here into Grimhild's Domain. So this is going to apply to our Witchfire that we talked about earlier. So Witchfire that you inflict deals more damage per 1% global chance to ignite with fire skills and per 1% chance to inflict damned with necrotic skills. That's going to go into one of the uniques that we're going to be using earlier or later on, but also that's going to go into Chaos Flames. That applies 48% chance to both the ignite and the necrotic, adding a whole bunch of multiplicative damage. So for ignites, which are a lot easier to get access to in this game, it's going to give you 5% more damage per ignite chance. And for the damned, it's going to give you 15% per chance for the damned with necrotic skills. And then on top of that, while you have ignite or damned overload, which will have ignite overload almost all the time, your hits spread Witchfire to a number of enemies within 10 meters. So it's going to apply to 5 additional enemies every time you're proccing that Witchfire. So now it's not only a massive single target DPS increase with this huge dot that's being applied, but it's going to just naturally spread it to all the monsters in the packs, just clearing out everything really, really well. After that, we're going to be grabbing the 5 points into Aspect of the Death. Now what this does is it's going to give us 15% increased health, which is an insane amount of health for a node to give you. Most of the time nodes give you flat health, not percentile health. And then on top of that, you're going to be doing more damage per negative ailment on you. So negative ailments are like ignite chance, bleeds, dam, stuff like that. Now, this does have a 3-point bonus here, where you're inflicted with damned on yourself whenever you or your minions kill a target or take a hit. Now, this node is a little bit of a double-edged sword because it is going to be doing necrotic damage over time to you. However, it's really not that much damage, and with all of our leech that we have and health gain from Chaos Bolts, it should help negate that. If you're having trouble early game surviving, just bring this down to only 2 points in this node for now, and then grab it the rest of the points later on when you have better gear, if you are struggling with staying alive at all. And that will help your survivability a little bit. But the damage multiplication that you get from this ability is just outweighs anything else on there. It's absolutely a go-to for scaling our damage. All right, so next up, we're going to be putting 5 points into Wither. So Withering chance on hit is going to be 100%, and then the 5-point bonus is you take less damage multiplicative with other modifiers from withered enemies. Since we have a 100% chance to apply it, Chaos Bolt's going to be applying that for us, which is going to be hitting everything. So we're basically just all the time going to be taking 8% less damage. And on top of that, Wither counts as a curse. So that's going to add our 3rd curse to the pool here. That's going to synergize well with the Dark Protections and with the Soul Stealer. Next, we'll be grabbing the additional 3 points into Infernal Lash for the additional Ignite chance. And then we will be grabbing all 10 points into Malefic Body. That's going to give us 10 Intelligence and 10 Vitality. The Intelligence is going to help scale our damage, and then the Vitality is going to give us even more life pool. After that, we are going to be switching over to the Lich Tree for 8 points. We're going to be taking the Dance with Death, which is going to give you 40% increased damage. And then it has a bonus where that effect is going to be tripled when you're below 35% health. That is going to come into play when we do switch to the unique version of the build. So for right now, it's going to give us 40% increased damage, but it's going to become even more effective on the second version of the build. After that, we're going to be grabbing the additional 4 points into Harrowing Armor, giving us additional armor, health, and giving us the 5-point bonus, where you now have more armor, multiplicative with other modifiers, per unique curse on attackers when they hit you. So that's 3% more armor per curse that we're applying. So just synergizing again with all 3 of these abilities here, with all these curses we're applying. Talking about curses, the next 5 points are going to go into Encroaching Darkness. When you directly cast a curse skill, which is Fissure, you also inflict a number of enemies around the target location with Anguish. So Anguish is another curse that's being applied for us. Anguish itself does a little bit of damage, but it's nothing that we're really scaling or really care about. The only thing we care about is we are now casting another AoE curse automatically while casting our other abilities, which is then going to synergize with these 3 abilities here, which are determined based on how many curses we have. And then for the remaining points that we have left, we're just going to put them into the Ashen one. It's going to give us that increased necrotic and increased elemental damage, which both will apply to Witchfire. And then that's going to wrap up the passive tree for this version of the build. So until you get any of the uniques, I would follow this build planner. That's going to help get you sorted. It's going to fly through the campaign without any issues. It's going to help get you into empowered monoliths, still with hardly any problems whatsoever. Really, really strong setup without any really hard items to acquire. And then it's only going to get better from here as we start getting into the unique items. So that's going to wrap up the passive tree for us. Alrighty, guys. Now that we've gone over the skills and the passives, I want to go over the gear for the non-unique version of the build and kind of see what we'd be looking for. If you are playing the unique version of the build and you're missing like 1 or 2 of the uniques, you can always look at this planner as well to see what would be a good item to kind of help replace those other items until you do acquire those uniques. So we'll start off here with the helmet. So probably the best helmet base for the non-unique version would be a Coven hat to give you increased mana regen. Since you're not going to have one of the uniques, it's going to help solve a lot of our mana problems, as well as using some of the other skills like Wandering Spirits to help with mana. I'll just give you an extra little bit of mana regen on top of that. As far as the stats themselves, you're going to be looking for Intelligence, Hybrid Fire damage, Try to focus the Exalted stat on the percentile health and then flat health as well. So we're going to be stacking a lot of health pretty much everywhere we can get it to try to get a large health pool as possible, since we're not going to have any ward to help protect this. For the amulet, you're going to want to be looking for a bone amulet. That is going to become even more important once you get to the upgraded version of this build, as it gives us a bunch of necrotic res as well as some fizz res. For the stats, you're going to want to focus on getting Exalted increased elemental damage over time. This stat is much better than just getting generic damage over time, because anytime you get more specific with damage, like the difference between crit and spell crit, or for this case, the modifiers are always much higher. So if we look at elemental damage over time from tier 6, it's 164 to 199. Whereas if you look at generic damage over time, it only goes 88 to 111. While we do deal damage that is not elemental damage over time, that's necrotic damage, majority of our damage is still going to be fire damage, so it's still going to be better for us to go for the stat. Other than that, we're going to be going for fire penetration. With fire skills, unlike lightning skills and poison, you don't get as much built-in penetration, so you want to get any kind of fire pen anywhere you can get it. As well as you're going to want to prioritize getting Ignite chance on hit, and then you can either get flat health here, or if you do need additional reses, if you don't have them in some of the other places on the gear, you can get res here as well. Next up, we'll go over the weapon. So we're going to use an Argent Scepter because the base weapon gives you increased damage over time. Now, while the weapon itself doesn't give you minus mana, you can actually get a mod on scepters. This can't be used on wands. That gives you -3 mana cost for skills. So that's one way you can make up the minus mana cost that you're missing from using a wand. As well as later on, we're going to be using a unique scepter, and if you get one similar to this one, you can actually slam it into that scepter to make it even better. So the most important mod here is looking for that minus mana cost. It doesn't need to be exalted right now. The exalted modifiers only give you like an additional 1 or 2 less mana costs. So I would try to focus on getting the chance to apply Ignite on hit as the exalted modifier, and then going for increased damage over time for the extra prefix. There is no elemental damage over time on weapons. And then for the last stat, going for fire penetration. For the chest piece, we're going to be using the Regalia chest piece. It's going to give us more percentile damage leached as health, just adding more sustain. Now, it is very important that if you do start transitioning to the unique version of the build, if you are transitioning, I wouldn't recommend doing it without the unique chest piece, but just make sure you're not using a Regalia, as the leech will actually break the unique version of the build. So if you do decide to try that out, just make sure you're not using a Regalia chest piece. What we're going to prioritize getting here is you actually care more about the percentile health rolls than you do the Fissure roll. I mainly just put it on there so I could show you where to put the extra levels if you do happen to get a +3 chest piece. But the most important stat on here is going to be the percentile health. Your chest piece rolls higher stats than any other piece of gear, so you'll get the most amount of health. So if you look at, for instance, you can get up to 18% health on the chest piece, whereas the helmet, that's a tier 6 modifier. The tier 5 modifier for percentile health only goes up to 12% instead of the 18. So it's on par with an exalted mod, even though it's only T5. And then we're looking for increased spirit frequency as well, just to get out more chaos bolts. For the offhand and the non-unique version of the build, we're going to be looking for the Chronolab because it gives us intelligence, and as well as it gives us mana regen. We're not a crit build, so we don't care about any of the crit offhands. And then the main stat we're looking for on here is you can go for either increased damage over time or fire damage. They both actually give you the exact same stat ranges. However, since they're the exact same, increased damage over time will apply to the damned damage as well as the necrotic part of Witchfire. So it's typically better to prioritize that. And then just getting resistances as the suffixes. For the rings, we're going to be looking for gold rings to help get us our Ellie res, as well as prioritizing the increased elemental damage over time. And then for the other stats, we're going to be looking for intelligence, flat health, and necrotic res. you're going to want to be trying to stack a lot of necrotic res, as when you do get the unique helmet, that is going to add a lot. So you're going to see I'm way over necrotic res cap. We're going to be stacking a lot of necrotic res over that cap for the second version of the build. So it's good to start getting items that are going to be able to transition to that build. For the belt, we're going to want a spider silk sash because it's going to give you poison res and cold res as the implicit modifiers, and a whole bunch of it at that. So that's like an equivalent to a like T5, T6 roll. And then the stats we're going to be looking for is increased elemental damage taken over time, the 100% chance to cleanse all ailments on potion use. So you can seal that modifier off if you want, but this is kind of the beginner setup for the build, so I didn't want to get too crazy with any sealed modifiers. But you only need tier 1 for that modifier. And then you want to focus the Exalted mod on hybrid health. That's going to give you flat health and percentile health. And then the last suffix be percentile health. For one of the rings, this is going to be almost identical to this ring, but for one of them, you do want to get a T5 critical strike avoidance roll. That's going to help you cap out on your critical strike avoidance, which is really important for your defenses. And then for the gloves, you're going to be using an Eternal Gauntlet gloves. This is going to give you up to 24% of your armor mitigation, also applying to damage over time. Damage over time is the scariest type of damage when you start pushing higher corruptions. That's typically what's going to kill you. So just getting a little bit more mitigation towards that is going to be really big. And then for the stats, you're going to be looking for increased damage over time, intelligence, focusing on getting the Exalted hybrid health, and then flat health. For the boots, we're going to be using a Citadel boots. I know a lot of you are going to be confused as we were just talking about critical strike avoidance, and the Citadel boots have reduced bonus damage taken from crits. Typically, you only get one or the other. The reason why is we have a lot of free suffixes on the non-unique version of the build, and so we don't really need any of the fire res for the Solarium Greaves or any of like the cold res from Heoborian boots. And these boots by far give us the most armor. So it gives us 185 armor versus the next best, I think, is 90. So, almost 100 armor difference is a massive defensive layer there to help bump up the armor percentage. So that's why we're going with the Citadel boots. We're going to focus on getting Exalted hybrid health. You can also get Exalted movement speed if you'd like. But with us already having permanent haste uptime, I don't feel like the movement speed's really necessary. It's still good to have at T5, but I would prefer to have a higher health pool. And we're going to be looking for that intelligence and more flat health. For the relic, I'm using a Putrid Souls for the poison res, just to help us cap poison res, as well as the ward per second would be really nice once you start transitioning to the other version of the build. So that way you don't have to immediately replace your relic if you don't have the unique relic yet. It'll be an easy kind of plug into the next version of the build. If you wanted to, you could also use a Damn Souls for the increased fire damage. That would be pretty good as well. I don't think anything else would really be too great. Yeah, nothing else would really apply. So you'd want to use one of these two bases. I would just try to start looking for Putrid Souls first, just to help make the transition easier though. But if you wanted to stick with the life version, you could go with the Damn Souls. And then that will wrap up all of the gear options. And then as far as the blessings go, what we're basically just looking for is health. Nothing else matters. So for the large immortal idol, we're looking for double health. For the unique version of the build, you do want to start getting these with percentile health, and then instead of the flat health, it would actually be best to grab elemental res. So that will be included in the loot filter as well. So start picking those up, as well as if you don't have enough LE res on your gear, you can use those to kind of supplement and get that extra LE res. We just have a lot more suffixes since we're not using any unique gear, that it makes it really easy to res cap, so it's just better on this version of the build to get health. And then for these guys, again, we're looking for double health. So all of these are just double health idols that give us a massive chunk of health. It gives us like 1,500 health or something just from the idols themselves. So a massive chunk there. As far as the blessings go, I know I get this question a lot in comments for people who are new to last Epoch. So the blessings, those will come from once you get to the monoliths in the endgame system, and there's a whole bunch of different islands for each little monolith. When you can kill the boss from that particular island, it gives you an option to choose a blessing. Now, the ones I have highlighted, there's a bunch of empty slots. The ones I've highlighted actually give your character some kind of stat. Like for this instance, this one gives you Ignite chance. All the ones that are empty, they only increase drop rates of stuff. It doesn't actually affect your character in any way. So that's why I left those ones blank. I didn't want to overwhelm you. Focus on getting these ones first. You can get the rest later on when you're empowered monoliths and you've got all your other blessings already upgraded. So with that being said, the first one is going to come from the Black Sun timeline, and we're looking for Ignite chance. That gives us an extra 100% Ignite chance. The next one will be coming from the Ending Storm. We're looking for Lightning Res, as there's nothing else really better to get on that. And with a perfect roll, that will completely cap your Lightning Res. You don't need it anywhere else on your gear. From the Reign of Dragons, we're looking for Critical Strike Avoidance. Now, it's really important you get over 100%. So if you get a roll on your ring, you need to make sure that these two equal 100%. If you don't have that, then you need to get Critical Strike Avoidance on your second ring to make sure it brings you over 100%. But with a decent roll, as long as you're like 65+% on there, you can just get a T5 Critical Strike Avoidance on one ring, and then you're good to go. But yeah, if that doesn't happen, just drop the Necrotic Res there and grab more Critical Strike Avoidance on that second ring. For the next one, it's going to come from the Age of Winter. We're going for Physical Resistance. So again, that can completely cap your Phys Res. Even if you don't have a perfect roll, even if you only have a 55%er, with using the Bone Amulet, that should completely cap your Phys Res. You don't need it on any of your gear, which is going to free up more of your suffixes to get health. The next one's going to come from the Spirits of Fire. Now, this is going to give you a chance to apply Fire Shred on hits. Like I was saying with fire damage, it's hard to get a lot of penetration. This is one of the ways you can get that. We attack so fast that on like a single target scenario, we're going to instantly hit the capped Fire Shred stacks there, just giving us a lot of extra damage. If you don't manage to get that one, you can also go for the one that gives you increased fire damage. But I do believe the Shred would actually be better for this build. And then that's going to wrap up all of the items and all of the idols that you'd be looking for the non-unique version of the build. And then I will be going over here in a second the newer setup, how the uniques function, and when you should be swapping over to the better version of this build. Once you acquire a few key unique pieces, you can switch over to that build after you typically get like 2 of the uniques, and then the other ones will kind of transition different skills that you're going to do. But I'll go over all of that in detail. But this should get you going. This will push, several hundred corruption and empowered monoliths just fine without any issues there. So really solid build, even without hardly any investment there. Alrighty, guys. Now that we've gone over kind of the initial starter setup for the build, I do want to go over the unique pieces of gear for the second version of the setup. I'll go over the skills and passive tree changes in a moment, but I want you to kind of have on the back of your mind what the different unique pieces we're taking are. That way those changes are going to make more sense for you. Now, before I go through any of the unique items, I do want to explain how I have things set up. I do have all of these set up with 4 legendary affixes on top of the items. I don't expect any of you to have, 4 legendary potential items unless you're on the Merchant's Guild and you're just loaded with gold. The reason why I put all 4 fixes on there is to show you the priority of stats that you want to try to get on the item. So if you look, I'll have one stat at T6, which is the number to the right of the stat itself, one at T5, one at T4, and one at T3. So the one at T6 is the most important stat. That's the one you want to focus on trying to getting. So even if you only have 1 legendary potential, try to get that stat. T5 would be the second best, T3 the third best, T4 the fourth best. So that's kind of how I have it planned out there. On my setup, most of my gear is 1 to 2 LP. I have I think 1 or 2 items with 3 LP on it, but they're really, really easy to get, like cheap items. All of mine were self-found, and I found several of them actually just leveling up the character, so they won't be hard to find at all. But a lot of my gear is like one legendary potential. So the first piece of gear that we're looking for is the Bone Clamor Barbute. Now, I actually tried really hard not to use this item because this item is used on almost every single Warlock build, and I hate being pigeonholed into using an item. However, this item is just so strong for defenses, especially if you're playing a ward build. It's just so good. You can't really pass up on it. So it gives us a bunch of armor, a bunch of dex, a bunch of intelligence, a whole bunch of necrotic res. But the big part is at the very bottom, where you get 1 ward per second per 3% uncapped necrotic resistance. You get a load of necrotic resistance for free just on the passive tree. On top of that, we can get a lot of our resistances elsewhere. So a lot of our gear just has free slots to throw in resistance on it to get us even more ward per second. This is going to be a ward build. So this item is going to be really key for boosting up those defenses. You don't need this item to set up this version of the build. If you don't have this item, you can use the Exalted helmet from the non-unique version of the build, or a very common helmet that I use for the very beginning part of the build that gives you a way higher damage output, is you can use a Calamity. Calamity is really easy to get legendary potential on because it only requires a level 7. And the lower level requirement of an item, the easier it is to get legendary potential. And the reason why this item is so good is not only does it give us up to 150% chance to ignite on hit with fire skills and the increased fire damage, but that particular line there, chance to ignite on hit with fire skills, was specific to fire skills, that applies to this node right here, the Grimhild's Domain that we talked about earlier, where it gives us a more damage multiplier with Witchfire. Now, the only stats that apply to that are ones that are specific with Ignite to fire skills or Damned to necrotic skills. So it can't just be chance to ignite. That doesn't count. It has to say chance to ignite with fire skills, which this does. So that gives us 150% of that, which gets multiplied drastically with the Witchfire. So massive damage increase, but so use that temporarily until you get access to a Bone Clamor. Or if you only like playing, at the lower corruption levels, you only want to play at like 300-400 corruption or lower, then just use the Calamity. You'll have a much better time just nuking everything and doing a ton of damage. The next unique item on the build is Exsanguinous. So this is one of the items that is required to set up this version of the build. So what this item does is it drains 20% of your current HP per second, and then it gives you 20% of your missing HP as ward per second. So what that means is that you notice we still have 4,000 health on this setup with ideal stats. The higher amount of overall health you have, it's going to give you more ward because you're missing more health per second. So we're still stacking health the same way as we are on the other version of the build. So a lot of that gear still translates directly over to this version of the build, since we're already going for that massive health pool. But now it's just being all converted over to ward. And when you have a couple of pieces that do that same thing, that drain your health and give you ward, it ends up giving you way more ward than your current health pool. And then on top of that, this also makes you immune to bleed at low life. So it just takes out one of the really dangerous things there at the end game where you don't even have to worry about it. And then it will also give you an increased cast speed if you use a potion in the last 4 seconds. The things you really want to prioritize on slamming this, I did put the health at T7 on here just to show you that is in fact more important than the +3 of Chthonic Fissure. I just want to be able to put those levels in the skill tree, like I was saying before, to show people who do have a chest that's a T6 Chthonic Fissure where to put those points. So prioritize percentile health over everything else. So my chest that I currently have is only a 1 legendary potential, and I slammed a whole bunch of them, and then I finally got the percentile health. So that's what I have on mine. That's your best stat. So the second best stat would be the Fissure. Third best would be flat health, then the increased spirit frequency with Chthonic Fissure. The next mandatory item for this setup, at least in my opinion, would be the Last Steps of the Living. So this is a boss drop, so it's kind of easy to target farm it, at least a base version. You don't need legendary potential on almost any of these uniques. I'll talk about the one that does, but this does the same thing that Exsanguinous does. So 15% of your current health is lost per second, 15% of your missing health is gained as ward. So with these two items together, you should have much more ward than you do health. And that's what allows you kind of transition to that low life build. On top of that, it gives you a whole bunch of movement speed for free. It does chill you every 3 seconds, but it gives you so much base movement speed on these boots that it doesn't really matter. The thing that you're looking for here is to get Exalted Hybrid Health, and then you would go for movement speed, flat health, and then intelligence on here. So these are the only two uniques that are really mandatory to start doing this setup. Some of the other uniques will change what skills you're using based on if you have them. So one of those items here is the Firestarter's Torch. This is also a item that requires level 1, so it's very easy to get legendary potential on it. But the most important stat to get on here is the minus mana cost for spell skills. You can see I only have it as a tier 1 on there because spell damage does not increase ignite damage, so it does nothing for us. We just need it as tier 1. That's going to give us minus 3 mana cost. And then if you look at the second to last stat on the Firestarter's Torch, it says minus 4 mana cost for fire spell skills. So Chaos Bolt is a fire skill. So that's minus 7 flat mana cost for Chaos Bolts, which will end up making it only cost 3 mana. The reason why that's so important is all of those Chaos Bolts that are coming out of Fissure still cost us mana. So this is going to drastically lower that. And once you acquire that slam, so not just the Firestarter Torch, this is the unique that does require you to slam the minus 3 mana cost on it, that is when you can drop Wandering Spirits. So you cannot drop Wandering Spirits until you have this slam on the Firestarter's Torch, because that will solve all your mana problems, and then you don't need Wandering Spirits anymore. So you can still set up this build with just Exsanguinous and Last Steps of the Living. Just don't drop Wandering Spirits until you get the Firestarter Torch. Now, the next unique item that we're going to talk about is Soulfire. Soulfire is really good because by implicit, it gives you up to 30% chance to apply Ignite on hit. But the big part here, the more spell damage to ignite enemies, that doesn't matter because we don't care about spell damage. It gives us an additional 100 to 160% chance to ignite on hit with fire skills. Again, that applies to this node right here. Another massive multiplier to your Witchfire ailment for single target damage especially. So that's really, really big. The only 2 items that are able to do that are Soulfire and the Calamity Helmet. So that's why we're using the Soulfire. We don't benefit from a lot of the stats on here, but because it's such a low level requirement for this item, it's very easy to get 3-4 legendary potential on here. I think I've found like 3 or 4 of them with 3 legendary potential on them just playing the game without even target farming them. So it should be very easy to get like even a 1 or 2 legendary potential one. So we get that increased ignite chance, we get increased fire damage if you've killed an enemy recently, and the implicit for ignite chance. The other stats don't matter. We're not self-igniting with this build, so we don't get the extra armor. We're also not using Hungering Souls in the endgame version, so that part doesn't apply. As far as the slamming for the different stats, we're going to be looking for increased elemental damage over time. Then we're going to be looking for flat health, then increased damage over time, and then frailty on hit. Frailty is an ailment that will make enemies do less damage to you, so if you can get that somewhere, it's a really nice defensive measure. The next unique item for the build that will also change one of the abilities that we can use is the Cycle of Putrescence. What this does is it makes it so your volatile zombies have a chance to resurrect equal to 100% divided by your number of zombies. So we're actually using 2 of them. So what that does is you summon zombies once, you'll summon 2 of them, so you'll pull up 2 zombies, and then you completely forget that they're even there. And they'll run up to enemies, explode, kill themselves, and we'll get into the skill tree in a minute, but it'll give you a whole bunch of buffs, and then they'll instantly res themselves, and then go run at another enemy and explode. So it's completely passive, you don't have to do anything with it once you originally summon them, and you don't have to summon them in between zones. Unless you exit out of the game, if you go to like the login screen or leave the game, they will follow you to each zone. So you summon them basically once per play session and you're good to go. The rest of the stats on here really don't matter. Everything on the ring itself outside of the implicits is whatever. It does 0 things for you. However, the base ring is technically an ivory ring, which gives you up to 46% necrotic res, which with the Bone Clamor helmet is going to give you extra ward per second. So that's really good. So both of our rings are going to be a Putrescence if you can. The things you're going to want to try to slam on them is prioritize elemental damage over time, then then critical strike avoidance. You do need to make sure one of these has critical strike avoidance like we talked about with the other gear. So get one of them with critical strike avoidance, then flat health, and then minion health. We'll get into the minion health once we go through the zombie tree and how that actually gives us a whole bunch of benefit. This is not a minion build, they're just utility skill. On the other ring, if you have enough critical strike avoidance, it's going to be the same stats we're looking for, except you can replace that critical strike avoidance with more necrotic res, so you get more ward per second from Bone Clamor. And then the final unique is going to be Throne of Ambition. What this does is you gain a stack of ambition when you hit a boss or rare enemy. Each stack of ambition gives you 2% more fire damage, so it's way better than just increased fire damage, and 2% more armor, stacking up to 20 times. So it gives you 40% more fire damage and 40% more armor, and you're going to build that up really, really fast with how fast this build is attacking. So those are the uniques for this build. I'll go through the rest of the gear here in a minute, but I do want to have a chance to go through the changes from going to this version of the endgame version of the build first. So let's go ahead and get into that. Alrighty, guys, so I'm not going to go over every single node on the tree, as we already did that in the previous version of the build. Go ahead and click the timestamp if you do need me to explain each of the nodes again for you. But I want to go over the changes from the other version of the build. So the most important thing you're going to notice is we dropped these 3 nodes here. So the reason why is, in order to get to this node, we have to take Devoured the Dam. And Devour the Dam was really good for our last version of the build because it gave us a whole bunch of mana and health. However, on this build, when you're using a low life and Exsanguinous and Last of the Living, if you're gaining health, it actually drastically drops your ward by thousands. So you want to be at 1 HP with this build, because the more health you currently have, the less health that's being drained, which means the less ward you're getting. So you want nothing that heals you on this version of the build. So it's very important that we drop these 2 nodes because they both give us health. With the Firestarter's Torch, like we talked about earlier, you don't need the mana gained from Devour the Damned anymore. It would be nice to be able to get Seeds of Chaos because it gives you that 10% more Chaos Bolts. However, it's just not worth grabbing the nodes. You technically can play with these 2. It'll just drop you by like 1,000 ward. It won't be the end of the world. However, if you take Curse the Blood, you will brick the build because it's giving you 6 health per curse, and we have like 5 curses every single time we hit something. So that will just drastically spike you up to full health, and you'll have 0 ward, and you'll just die. So we drop these 3 nodes here, and then what we will take instead is we will be taking the 1 extra point into Condemned to Chaos for 100% damage chance. We will also be taking a Grave for 2. So Chaos Bolts deal more damage over time, multiplicative with other modifiers, equal to a portion of your missing health. So because we're missing all of our health and we stack a bunch of health, this gives us a massive multiplier for our damage over time that's being applied by Chaos Bolts. And then we will also be taking the Gate. So hitting your minions with Chaos Bolts grants them any Damned, Ignite, Bleed, or Frostbite chance that Chaos Bolts gains from this tree. It has a whole bunch of Damned and Ignite chance. Like we talked about with the rings, we're going to be using Summon Volatile Zombie. It's not a whole lot, but it just adds a couple extra stacks of Ignite for you occasionally. And you don't even have to hit your own minions with it. It's going to automatically be doing that with Fissure, so don't worry about like trying to aim your Chaos Bolts at the minions at all. That'll just be automatically taken care of. The other node that we grab just for our remaining 1 node is we grab 1 point of Pandemonium. That just gives the Chaos Bolts a chance to have extra area of effect, so it can ignite more enemies with each Chaos Bolt. The order that you want to take them in, I'll still have the slider here that will help show you exactly which ones to take first, now that we're dropping all of these nodes here. So just go ahead and follow that, and I'll give you the exact order for everything. All right, next up we have Chthonic Fissure. Some of this tree did also change as well. So what we are going to be changing is we are not taking any of the points in the Mantle of Flames because we need some extra points for this skill. So, and that wasn't really giving us that many ignites just from those points alone. So we're going to be dropping those. And then the things that we're going to be grabbing with dropping those points is we are going to be going down here, taking 1 travel point into Severed Wards. We'll be grabbing the 2 points into Singed by Terror, which is going to make your spirits shred fire resistance for you, which is really nice. And then we'll be taking the 1 point into Return Below. This will make more sense once we go over one of the new skills we'll be able to get from dropping Wandering Spirits once we get the Firestarter Torch. So when spirits torment an enemy afflicted by an Infernal Shade, which is going to be our skill right here that we're going to be using, they consume the shade, causing it to instantly deal its damage increasing all existing Chthonic Fissures' frequency of releasing spirits up to a maximum. So it's Infernal Shade is going to be another damage over time ability we're going to use. It's going to be rapidly applying itself automatically, so you don't have to worry about casting it at all yourself. And it's going to get instantly consumed every time a Chaos Bolt hits that enemy or the spirits, and just dealing all the damage all at front. It's like 30k damage or something like that just instantly gets applied. So it's a massive spike in damage. And then on top of that, it gives you up to 60% more spirits, which means more Chaos Bolts being cast. So those are the big changes here on this tree. I do have a slider here to show you where to put your points. So if you don't have a +3 chess piece, you're just going to drop the points right here. And then this is going to be your skill tree. So just follow the slider if you have any questions about that. Alrighty, guys. The next change that we're going to go over is on the Transplant tree. This one is very, very simple. As I'm sure you've noticed, I no longer have Bone Curse on my skills here. So I don't need this automatic cast of Bone Curse anymore. So the only thing that's changing on this tree is we're dropping the 2 points here, and we're adding it to Fleeting Form for the additional cooldown recovery speed. So just follow the slider on which nodes to take first. We're just respecking these 2 nodes here. All right, guys. So this is Infernal Shade. This node this skill you're only going to take once you have a Firestarter's Torch that has the minus mana slammed on top of it. That is going to allow you to drop the Wandering Spirits, which is going to allow you to pick this skill up. So do not do that until you get to that point. You don't have to have this skill to do this setup, but it's going to be a lot more damage now that we don't need the mana regen from Wandering Spirits. So what is Infernal Shade? You target an enemy, and then all nearby enemies take fire damage per second. Each enemy can have only 1 Infernal Shade attached to them at a time. And then it expires after 5 seconds, and you have a maximum of 4 shades. You don't need to worry about casting this skill at all. It's actually going to be automatically cast by our zombie. We'll get into that later. And like I was saying, you don't even have to cast zombies because that's going to be automated by the unique rings we're using. So these last 2 skills are 0 buttons for you. That's why this build is just so easy to play. A lot of it's just automated. Even Chaos Bolt is automated with Fissure. You only really cast it on single targets, so it's really easy to play. Now, Infernal Shade is different than Ignite, but it is still a fire damage over time ailment, essentially. So it's still benefiting from all of our increases to fire damage that we're getting. There are some nodes up here that give you Ignite chance. Now, the reason why we don't take that is it's giving you 40% chance of Ignite chance per second. That's not 40% Ignite chance each time it like ticks or anything like that. That's every 1 second you're getting a chance to apply like a couple stacks of Ignite. So it's almost no extra damage because we're going to be applying hundreds of stacks of Ignite. So like an extra like 4 to 5 stacks here and there is nothing. So you don't want to scale the Ignite nodes on here because of that reason. So because it's a new skill, I'm going to go over what to take and when. So the first point is going to be a travel point into Ignition. That's going to give you extra mana efficiency. This node doesn't really cost any mana anyway, so it's totally fine. The cast speed doesn't matter because you're never going to be casting it. You're then going to be taking 1 point into Blaze Shade. So what that does is whenever the Infernal Shade is being auto-casted by the zombies, it has a 20% chance to turn into a Blaze Shade instead of an Infernal Shade, which does 20% more damage and then has 200% increased area of effect. So this basically attaches itself to a target and then has a big fire aura around it. And then any of the targets inside that area are taking the same amount of damage as the target it's attached to. So that would be the first point. The second point is going to be into Fleeting Shade. So the Blaze Shade, whenever it procs that, now deals 150% more damage, but then lasts 60% less for the duration there. So a little bit less duration, but that doesn't really matter all that much because we have the node in Fissure where it's automatically activating all of the damage for it. So it doesn't matter too much. So the next point after that is we're going to be putting 2 points over into Cackling Flames. That's going to increase the duration a little bit. That's going to help offset the duration that we're missing from that. Next, we'll be grabbing 2 points into Heart of Fire. That is going to give us 40% more damage. All these nodes give us so much more multiplicative damage that it makes the Infernal Shade actually hit really, really hard. It does reduce the radius at which that it applies. But honestly, the main reason for Infernal Shade, we don't need help with area clear. We're already spreading all of our ignites and Witchfire automatically to all nearby enemies. So the main thing I want is single target from the spell. So I am just foregoing all of the increased radius for this skill. I just want it to mainly give me a crap ton of extra damage on bosses. After that, we'll be taking all 5 points into Wildfire. That's going to give you 90% more damage and then reduce that duration a little bit more. Next, we'll be putting the remaining 2 points into Heart of Fire for the extra damage, giving us a total of 80% more damage. And then because of the node on Fissure, that it does consume the entire damage it was going to do over its full duration, I am going to try to offset some of the duration we lost by taking all of the points into Crackling Flames, so it does do more damage. And then for the remaining 3 points, we're going to go into Fanning the Flames, give us another 16% more damage and a little bit of extra area of effect. So that's going to be Infernal Shade. Again, this is nothing you have to deal with once you have the zombie setup ready to go. So if you don't have the zombie setup, then you can manually cast it yourself. It would be slightly more damage if it's not being automatically casted to just cast Infernal Shade instead of Chaos Bolts on like big bosses. And just spam cast that instead. All right, and for the final skill is Summon Volatile Zombie. This skill you are only going to pick up once you get the unique ring. So once you get the Cycle of Putrescence, that is when you can use it. You can start using it even if you only have one of the rings. You'll just be summoning one zombie at the beginning of your play session instead of 2 to make sure it's always resurrecting it for you. And then this will replace the Bone Curse. Now, the reason why that we're going to be dropping that one curse, even though it does a lot for us, is the zombie is going to do a lot of what the Bone Curse already did, except it's going to be automatic. We never have to deal with it, and it's going to cast more of our abilities, and it's going to give us more defenses. So we're going to follow the slider here because it's a new skill. Basically, how Volatile Zombie works is it summons a zombie from the ground, and then it goes over to the nearest enemy and it kills itself. It explodes and it deals fire damage and physical damage to all nearby enemies. We don't actually care about the damage that the zombie is doing itself. That's how it functions as a core. So with the ring, you summon it once per play session, and then the zombie will just run over to the nearest enemy, blow up, the ring will automatically summon a new one for you, and it'll just continue in this endless cycle. So the first one point you're going to go to is Path of Destruction. This is just a travel point. I don't care about the explosion damage on Volatile Zombie whatsoever. And then the 2 points here we're going to go into is Necromantic Fervor. What that's going to do is you're going to be healed for a portion of the zombie's maximum HP pool when they explode. It's really easy to stack minion health to like way higher levels than your health by like a far margin. So like one piece of our gear would be 15% health, whereas if you add like minion health on a piece of gear at like T5, it's like 150% increased damage. On top of that, the minions are naturally getting health from scaling intelligence, so they get 10 flat health for every point of intelligence we have as well. So I know I talked about not wanting to heal at all because we're playing low life, and so that's where this next node comes into play, Vital Ward. So it's going to convert all of the health we would be getting here into ward. So this is basically just a spike in ward every single time the zombie explodes, which with one ring is about like once every second and a half. With 2 rings, we're getting 2 zombies every second and a half. So really big amount of extra ward that we're getting from this guy. The next 4 points we're going to go into is Effigy of Combustion. When a zombie dies, you have a chance to cast Infernal Shade on an enemy near the zombie. Infernal Shade cast this way costs less mana. So it takes out 50% of the mana cost of Infernal Shade, and now we never have to touch that button. Infernal Shade is just completely automated because of the rings that set up. Zombies automated as well. Never have to deal with those 2 skills again. All right. The next points, we're going to be putting 2 travel points into Forceful Commander. It's going to increase the summoning speed, which doesn't matter, and mana efficiency. We'll be taking 1 travel point to Daunting Blast, gives them a stun chance, it doesn't really matter. The 1 travel point to Ravenous gives them extra hit damage against bosses. I don't care about the zombie damage whatsoever. And then we'll be taking 2 points into Pull of the Grave. With dropping Bone Curse, we were losing our automatic execute with the kill threshold. Zombies can do that too, except it's better. So now we're going to be killing enemies at 16% health. So as soon as a boss gets like 16% health and the zombie just walks over and blows himself up, it's going to instantly kill the boss for you. So it's going to automate your kill threshold. And then on top of that, this point right here is more of a travel point, but it's going to convert them over to necrotic damage. And then right here, Corpse Pain. The explosion from zombies now applies Mark for Death, which is what our Bone Curse was doing, which makes all of the enemies have 25% less resistance. So we're getting the two major parts of Bone Curse on our zombie for free, but we don't ever have to worry about casting it anymore. So it's just way easier to do. On top of that, it's casting Infernal Shade, and it's giving us a whole bunch of extra ward. So it's just way, way better than what Bone Curse was doing for us, even though we lose that one extra curse on an enemy. All right, so next up, we're going to be grabbing the 1 point over to Grave Attunement as a travel point. So that way we can get 1 point into Giant Zombie. Now, when it is cast automatically for you, you only have a 10% chance for this to happen, but it's still one of the best nodes because there's no health nodes on the zombie tree itself. And that's the only thing we care about the zombies. We don't care about its damage at all. We just care about how much health it has. That's going to give us more ward with the Vital Ward node. So what this does has a 10% chance that when it casts automatically, that it's going to have 100% increased health. And then for the final 2 points, we're going to be putting them into Fervor. We don't care about the damage, but it does give the zombies 8% more movement speed, which means when they resurrect, they're going to be moving faster so they can run over to an enemy faster to blow themselves up. So it's just going to help that chain reaction go off a lot more smoothly. And then that's going to wrap up all of the changes and new skills for the final version of the build. All right, so next I want to talk about the passive tree because there are some minor changes to the passive tree. There's not a whole lot that's different, but I do want to go over some of the changes. So I'm not going to go over each of the points in depth as I already did that multiple times on the other timestamp. So if you need me to explain any of the nodes, go ahead and click the timestamp for the first time I went through the passive tree. But we're going to be taking the same points mostly here. So we're taking the 8 points for Forbidden Knowledge for the Intelligence Necrotic Res. Instead of taking 8 points in Soul and Vitality, we're only taking 6 points. And then the difference here is we're going to drop all of the points from Blood Aura. Just percentile damage really doesn't do a whole lot for us. And instead, we're going to take 1 travel point to Mania of Mortality. This gives you a chance to gain a little bit extra ward when a minion dies or an ally. While that sounds good with our zombies constantly dying, it's only a 10% chance. It doesn't give us that much. So we're only going to take the 1 point in there, but it's going to give us access to Unnatural Preservation. That's going to give us 40% ward retention. What ward retention does is ward by default decays, and it decays at a pretty rapid rate if you don't have any ward retention. So we're going to get all our ward retention from this node and from stacking Intelligence. Intelligence is going to give us more ward retention by default as well. So that'll just slow down the rate at which it decays, keeping us up at a higher ward percentage. This will also give us 20% necrotic res, which is going to go into the Bone Clamor helmet to give us more ward per second, as well as giving us 20% poison res. So that's the difference here for the base Acolyte tree. Going into the Warlock tree here. So the most of the points are going to be the same. So we're still starting out with the Soul Stealer and going into Chaos Flames. The one big difference is you're going to notice we went for the 5 points in Spiteful Decay right away, and we didn't take Spirit Leech. If you have Spirit Leech, it will kill the build when you're playing on low life. It was very important when you're playing life stacking, but when you're playing low life, you want 0 healing like I talked about before. This will instantly heal us up to full, which gets rid of all of our ward pool and just kills the build for us. So make sure you unallocate these 6 points at a Spirit Leech, and we'll go over where we're going to put those extra points later on. Okay, the next part here that we're going to be putting those points into that we just lost from Spirit Leech, we're going to put 3 points into Ward of Malevolence. What that's going to do is give us a little bit of ward decay threshold. It works kind of like ward retention. It just stops you from getting past a minimum amount of ward, which isn't really a big deal because we're going to have such a large pool. It's going to give us 9 ward whenever we kill an enemy, and then the channeling part doesn't matter. But we're mainly taking these points to get over here. So this is going to give us 3 vitality, but the 3-point bonus is we're going to get the extra ward decay threshold per 1% necrotic res. That's going to be pretty nice since we're stacking necrotic res. It's going to stop us from decaying past a certain threshold, and that will actually put us up at a decent amount where we can't get below a pretty large amount of ward. All right, so next up, we're grabbing the 5 points into the Ignite chance here and Infernal Lash. We're still grabbing the 5 points into the Ashen one for the Witchfire. None of that's really new. We're taking the 1 point to Harrowing Armor and going into Dark Protections. That's not new, but the ward per second here is actually really, really nice now that we're actually stacking ward. Grabbing the 5 points into Fleeting Crone like we did before, and then going into the extra damage for Witchfire. We'll still be grabbing all 5 points in Aspect of Death. The extra health is going to give us extra ward because we're draining more of our health, and that extra damage multiplier is still really big. Still grabbing the 5 points into Wither for the extra curse. Finishing out the points in Infernal Lash for all 8. The 10 points here is going to make a lot bigger of a difference because now it's the health and intelligence. Intelligence is giving us ward retention, which is really nice, but those points don't actually change. This point right here changes drastically. So instead of just giving us 40% increased damage, now that we're a low life build, we are always going to get triple this amount of damage. So instead of 40%, we're getting 120% for these 8 points. So those are a really efficient nodes there for extra damage. Next up, we'll be getting up to the 5 points in Harrowing Armor for the bonus, so that didn't change at all. We'll be getting the 5 points Encroaching Darkness for the extra curse. That's the same. And then we'll just be finishing out the extra points here into the Ashen one. So we won't be able to get all 8 like we were before, but we'll just get the extra point there. So very little has changed, mainly just dropping this point for here. That is really the only big change that happened there. We don't want the leech. This helps us with our ward generation. So that's pretty much the only changes in the passive tree. So follow the sliders to show you guys the progression. So get the extra ward retention there and get the extra ward threshold over here, and you're basically good to go. Next up, I did want to quickly go over the Exalted gear, as they did change a little bit versus the non-unique version of the build. So we're going to go through these one by one really fast. There's only 3 of them, so it shouldn't take us too long. So going over our Bone Amulet. So we're still looking for the same stats here. Bone Amulet with increased elemental damage over time, and Void Pen with some resistance and chance to ignite on hit. If you can seal off a stat, try to seal some necrotic res on there for the extra ward for the Bone Clamor Barbute. For the next item, this item has changed. So we are now looking for an Opulent Focus base item for the Catalyst. The reason why is it gives us up to 54 ward per second. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually the difference of like closer to 500 to 1,000 ward, depending on your gear. That you're basically getting as your overall ward threshold. So the extra ward per second there is really, really big. And then we're also getting up to 86% ward retention. So when you're crafting your focus, try to make sure you're at the top end for the ward per second and the ward retention, because there's a pretty big variable there, and it will make a massive difference in your ward. Now for the stats are a little bit different as well. So instead of getting 2 resistances on here, we're actually going to focus the Exalted modifier to being ward per second. So same reason for the implicit I was talking about, that's going to give you a lot of extra ward. And then the other big difference is you're going to notice I have minion health on here. That's going to go back to our Volatile zombie, where the more health they have, every time they die, they're going to give us more ward. So we drop a little bit of the damage there just to get the extra health, helps us stay alive. Next up, we have the Spider Silk Sash. There's not a whole lot different here, except I did seal off the cleanse. If you have a tier 1 cleanse all ailments on potion use, if it's at a tier 1, any stat, it's 100% chance that you're going to be able to seal that off. So you can seal that off so you have room for an extra stat, in which case we can put increased minion health again. So we can get an extra 150% minion health for a zombie. Everything else stays the same. Now for the gloves, these changed a little bit here. So instead of having damage over time and intelligence, what we're going to be looking for is minion health, And then the really, really, really can't emphasize that enough, big mod on here. None of the other stats matter unless you have this mod, is the percentage of current health lost per second, percentage of missing health gained as ward. That is almost as big as like the Last Steps of the Living. It has the same effect, and it's pretty close to the Exsanguinous too. Actually, it's better than the Last Steps of the Living. So that one stat outweighs this entire unique item. So it's really important to get that. It's an experimental modifier, which means it either has to drop with that modifier or you have to craft it a specific way. The craft is 100% guaranteed chance to be able to get it. I will show you how to craft that mod onto a pair of gloves with a live example. So click the timestamp on crafting gloves if you need to figure out how to add experimental modifiers to your gloves. And I will show you step by step how to make sure you do it. It's very easy. It's very cheap. It hardly costs any materials. We'll get you covered there. So focus on getting that as high a tier as possible. Other than that, we're just looking for hybrid health, flat health. And if you have the opportunity to seal a stat, go for necrotic res for the extra ward per second for bone clamor. And then that's basically all of the Exalted gear. Everything else is being replaced by a unique item that we already went over. The other big change is our idols. So I already talked about this earlier, but instead of using double health idols, we're going to use health and Ellie res. Since we're using so many uniques, it's harder to get our reses capped. So that will just help cap out the resistances. So try to get health and res there. On these guys, you can just get double health. If you still need extra res, you can drop the suffix on the health, and you can put more Ellie res on there if you need to. And then we already talked about the unique idol there. So that's just giving us the extra fire damage and armor. The blessings stay exactly the same, so nothing has changed there. The only thing I would actually consider swapping out is you can swap out the Grand Breath of the Cinders for the Fire Shred. You do get a decent amount of Fire Shred from Fissure from right here. It's not always at capped for the Shred as it would be with this, but I think it's close enough that it would actually outweigh it. Yeah, switching this over to fire damage. I think you would get more damage output doing that since you do already have a majority of the Shred from Fissure itself. So I'd consider doing that. But that's going to wrap up all of the gear, idols, and blessings for you. So that's essentially how you put together the character. I will show you guys how to craft the gloves, as well as show you where to target farm all of the unique items, and honestly, all of the idols and Exalted gear too. So I'll show you guys how to target farm each of those. So if there's a specific piece of gear that you're missing, just look for the timestamp on it, and I will show you how to acquire it. Alrighty, guys, next up I want to go over target farming, where to get each piece of gear, the best way to obtain that through different methods to increase your chances of getting that gear, as well as just kind of like a self-use resource for you. So before I go into game to better show you where each piece of gear comes from, I wanted to show you guys a thing that's on the build planner here. So if you hover over any piece of gear, if you look at the very bottom of that piece of gear, it's going to tell you how rare it is to get legendary potential. So for instance, the Bone Clamor, its legendary potential rating is 65, which means it's uncommon for an LP1, it's pretty rare for an LP2, extremely rare for an LP3, and almost impossible for LP4. So LP stands for legendary potential. And then right underneath that, it says where to obtain it. So Bone Clamor is a random drop. It doesn't come from a specific source. However, there's a timeline to target farm the Black Sun because there is an echo reward that will give you a random unique helmet. So that's one way you can do it. That's actually the least effective way to farm them. But in cases where it's a boss drop, such as the Last Steps of the Living, you can see it says dropped from Frost Lich from the Blood, Frost, and Death timeline. It's a 50% chance to drop. It's super, super common. So you should only have to do them on average probably 2 times to get the boots. Sometimes you'll be unlucky. It may be 5 times. Sometimes you'll be lucky. You'll get it first try. But so if it ever says like a specific timeline to target farm as a echo reward, that means it's a random drop. And then if it doesn't, then that means it is a boss drop. So I just wanted to show you guys that. That way, if there's any other builds you guys are playing or trying to figure out how to get other items for an upcoming build, that's how you can tell where to target farm them. But I'm still going to go over the best method to use to target farm them and which order you should try to get the items at. So hopefully that helps you out, but I will see you guys in game where I can go through a better explanation. Alrighty guys, so when it comes to farming the uniques, the first thing you need to establish on that unique is if it is a boss drop or if it is a random drop, because that is going to drastically affect the ways that you can target farm them. So the uniques on the left-hand side here are the 2 boss drops exclusives, and all of the ones on the right are random drops. So random drops typically are actually much easier to get than boss drops. Even though you know exactly where to go to farm the boss drops, there's less things that influence them dropping the items that you want. So you cannot obtain a boss drop from anywhere else except for that boss. So if you are in the Circle of Fortune and you have access to Prophecies, Prophecies cannot proc a boss drop. So even if you get a prophecy that says when you're killing the Frost boss that drops the Last Steps of the Living, and he has a chance to drop 30,000 unique boots, whatever the hell the prophecy says, none of those boots will ever be a Last Steps of the Living. He still has the exact same chance to drop Last of the Living, which is a 50% drop chance to drop 1 pair. So no matter what prophecy you get, even if it's specific for killing that particular boss, it will not affect his actual unique drop pool in any way. It'll just give you 30,000 random drop unique boots, which is not Last Steps of the Living. So that's very important to know. The other thing is you have Runes of Ascendance, which have a chance to upgrade a normal, magic, rare, or exalted item into a unique item of that same type. So if you use it on a pair of boots, it would give you a random pair of boots. These do not work on boss drops. So I could do 1,000,000 Runes of Ascendance on boots, and I will never get the Last Steps of the Living. It will only give me random drops. So keep that in mind. That is how it functions. There's no way around that. It is what it is. So how I recommend doing target farming is I never do the timeline specific farming for random drops. So you can get like, for instance, on the Black Sun, I believe it has a chance to give you a node that drops like 1 unique helmet when you do it. So you could do that to potentially get like a Bone Clamor. The reason why I don't do that is you're going out of your way to try to get these random nodes that are going to give you 1 helmet drop. Maybe if you're in the Merchant's Guild, then that will be the best way. But I think, honestly, if you're in the Merchant's Guild, the best way to farm it would just be to do a gold farm something valuable, sell that, and buy your Bone Clamor. If you are on the Circle of Fortune, like I am, you are much better using either Runes of Ascendance or Prophecies, because I can make a boss drop 82 helmets. I think that's the most I've had so far, as I've gotten a boss to drop 82 unique items, and that wasn't even with like all of the prophecy slots filled. It's just how much favor I had until I ran out. So I can make 1 boss drop 82 unique helmets. Likelihood is I'm probably going to get like 5 or 6 Bone Clamors on that, at least, and probably at least 1 or 2 that's got legendary potential on there. So that is how I recommend farming all of these, which means we don't need to go to any specific timeline to farm the random drops. So how I farm is I focus on the boss drops, and I set up prophecies along the way to farm those boss drops to drop my random drops. So the most important boss drop to farm first would be Last Steps of the Living. In order to switch over to the unique build, I would recommend having Last Steps of the Living and Exsanguinous. So what I would do is I would set up farming Last Steps of the Living, which in order to farm that, it is going to be right here in the Blood, Frost, and Death timeline, and it is going to come from the final boss in the Blood, Frost, and Death timeline is a 50% chance. It just so happens that the Blood, Frost, and Death timeline also has unique nodes for chest armors, so if you run into them, you can do them. Maybe you'll drop unique Sanguinous, maybe not. But while I'm farming that, what I would do is set up prophecies. Now, your prophecy farming technique is going to depend on what rank you are, because you get different buffs for the different ranks you are. So the ones that are going to help you target farm uniques is going to be rank 2 for using Runes of Ascendance. You can get double reward echoes. So if you did do a unique armor reward echo, you could get 2 unique armor reward echoes. And then level 6 will give you uniques that are twice as likely to farm or to have legendary potential. That's going to help when you're farming multiple of the same items. And then the really big one is rank 10, where items from Prophecies are duplicated. So if you are going to farm a certain boss or something and it says that the Prophecy is going to drop you 1 unique helmet, now it's going to drop you 2 unique helmets. So that's really, really strong. The other big part is getting to rank 7 and 8 for the lenses that I use to target farm. So the Prophecy target farming is going to apply to all of these uniques, all of your idols, and all of your Exalted gear. So if you haven't farmed for Prophecies before, you're going to click on one of these telescopes. Each zone, so you have north, east, south, and west, is specific for a particular type of item. So if we look at the south is for jewelry. That's going to be your rings, relic, and amulets. So if you need one of those, you're going to farm here. And the east is going to be weapons and offhands. So if you need like the Firestarter's torch, or you need a good opulent focus offhand, this is where you're going to go to do that. The north section is for armor, and it also, even though this is a ring icon, it's just a random unique. So that's like a unique with 1 legendary potential. So it's not a specific type of unique, it's just going to be something random. But if you need, your helmet, body armor, belt, gloves, anything like that, that's a random drop, then you're going to go here to do that. And then if you need any idols or runes or glyphs, you'll go here to farm that. Now, the next thing I want to go over is the lenses. So there's a couple different lenses that you can equip in here depending on your rank on the Circle of Fortune. So the higher the rank, the more lenses you get and the different things that they will do. If you are rank 8 or 7 and 8, I use these 2 lenses on every single zone that I do. So if you notice, most of mine have 2 missing. It's because I'm just swapping these around to farm for them. So what they do is the first one, Refracting Lens of Wealth, it increases the cost of your blessings by 90%, but all of the Prophecies, they offer double the rewards on completion. So if you have a prophecy that says it's going to drop 5 unique helmets when you kill a boss, now it's going to drop 10 unique helmets. And that stacks with the rank 10 node here. So it's the rank 10 duplicates them. So if it drops a Bone Clamor, it's going to drop 2 Bone Clamors. So instead of dropping 10 unique helmets, it's now going to give you 20 unique helmets. So it gets pretty crazy with that. The next one is the Refracting Lens of Rhyme. So it increases the cost even more by another 80%. Turn off the chat here so we don't see all the random stuff. All right, so it increases the cost by 80%, but then all of the Prophecies offer twice as many uses before expiring. So what that means is if I look over at this one, it tells me if I go and kill if I kill Emperor of Corpses in the Reign of Dragons timeline, it gives me 3 unique relics. And then it doesn't have a use thing on there, so that can only happen 1 time. But if I had this lens in there, it would allow me to kill him 2 times and drop 3 unique relics. Let me find one that actually has a use on here. Okay, so right there. So this one says at the very top, fulfilled 0 out of 2 times. So that means you could kill 2 Shade of Orbises, and each time it's going to give you Exalted body armor drops. So if I put that lens in, it would change that 2 times into a 4 times that I could kill him. So you're really getting just the most bang for your buck if you use these 2 lenses. The third lens that I use is to increase the odds of getting the rewards I want. So for instance, I was farming for relics. So this one gives me 10% increased chance per rank to find relics. That's going to give me more relic prophecy rewards when I'm re-rolling my tab. So you can see there was 2 there, and then I re-roll on here. I got 2. So if I have this in here, it's going to give me more chances of seeing the relics popping up. So that third one I just do for whatever type of item I'm going for. So over here, it's set up for Glyphs of Despair, because I was trying to farm for Glyphs of Despair. Over here, it's set up for helmets because I was trying to farm Bone Clamor helmets, so I needed help doing that. So I'm just slotting in these two guys here, and then the whatever I'm trying to target farm. That is the best way to do it. The other thing is when you're looking at the event and the condition, always do events that won't take you away for whatever you're currently farming. So for instance, if I am farming for Last Steps of the Living, I want to be inside the Blood, Frost, and Death timeline. I am not going to take any prophecies for something outside of that timeline. So if I'm rolling around here, let's say this is a unique boots instead of the rare boots, but it says event, Death of Husk of Elder Gaspar, the Last Ruin timeline. That's not the timeline I'm farming. I'm ignoring that one. It doesn't matter if it's giving me what I want. Death of Chronomancer Jorah, that's in the Temporal Sanctum dungeon. I don't want to run Temporal Sanctum right now. I'm trying to farm my boots. I'm ignoring this. Even if it costs you more favor to re-roll, it is worth doing that and will save you more time by only selecting quest rewards from an area that you are actually going to be farming. So the stuff I'm going to be looking for is the Blood, Frost, and Death boss kills, generic kill rare monster, like kill siege golems, kill diamond matron, stuff like that. Killing the Shade of Oribus, because Shade of Oribus is in every single timeline, or killing exiled mages, because exiled mages are available in every single timeline. So I cannot stress that enough. I say in every single video, do not waste time by being like, oh, I gotta go kill this tier 2 dungeon here, and then I have to go do this arena tier 4 here. And then you're just gonna be taking away so much of your farming time that it's gonna take you 10 times as long to get all the gear than what it would take me to get the gear, just farming in the place I'm already need to farm for the other pieces of items I'm looking for. So keep that in mind. So target farm for the boots first, Last Steps of the Living from the Blood, Death, and Frost timeline, and then start setting up prophecies for Exsanguinous. That's the these are the 2 priority items. So this is the random drop. So you set up all your prophecies for unique chest armors, and then you go farm the Blood, Frost, and Death timeline. Once you drop the boots from the Blood, Frost, and Death timeline, the next boss specific drop is the Throne of Ambition. The Throne of Ambition can be found over here in the Stolen Lance boss. So you have to kill the final boss in the Stolen Lance. So once you drop the boots, you can do that. If you drop the chest piece already while you're looking for the boots, then you just go down the line and you start farming your next item. I feel like the next really big item to target farm for random drops is the Firestarter's Torch. It's a very common drop, so you should get a lot of them. Again, you have to get the minus spell mana cost on the Firestarter Torch in order for it to be usable. You could technically use a base one without it, but you can't drop the Wandering Spirits until you slam the minus spell cost on there. It only needs to be tier 1. Mine's a tier 5, but it still gives me -3 spell damage. Oh, that's funny. I got disconnected mid-recording. But yeah, I only get the -3 spell damage from tiers 1 through 5, so it doesn't matter which tier that spell mana cost is. So that would be the next item for the random drops that I would start farming while I'm looking for the other boss drops I need. Once you drop the Firestarter's Torch, the next item I would look for would be a ring, the Cycle of Putrescence, because that's what's going to be allow me to drop Bone Curse for the Summon Volatile Zombie. And doing that is going to automate my Infernal Shade, so I don't need to cost that. So that kind of helps set up 2 of my skills. So start target farming these next if you can. And then after that, I would start working on the Bone Clamor Barbu. That's going to give you a lot of defense. So start farming for that guy. And then lastly, for the random drop, start going for the Soulfire if you can. And then the boss drops, those ones, there's no prophecies to set up or anything for that. So you just start with the boots. Once you drop the boots, you change timelines and you go farm the Throne of Ambition. If you need to double check where those drop from, just make sure you look at the build planner on the very bottom of the item when you hover over it, or you can check the timestamp again for you. But that's the orders I would farm all of the unique items. Once you farm all the unique items, you can set up your prophecies for all of your Exalted gear and all of your idols. So you can just set up a whole bunch of prophecies to drop a billion different idols to give you health and Ellie res. You can set them up to drop a whole bunch of opulent focuses to help you farm for the stats that you're looking for. So your prophecies are going to be your best friend for target farming. The other option is the Runes of Ascendance. It is much, much less likely to give you what you want. Also, you don't get the bonus for legendary potential for Runes of Ascendance. You can see I have 145 of them. I almost never use them because prophecies are just better. But any of these random uniques, you can target farm from it. It doesn't need to be the particular base that you're looking for. It can be any random base. So we'll do a random thing here for you guys just to see what happens. So this is a Argent Scepter. This is a Brass Scepter. So this one still could roll into a Firestarter Torch. It's just going to be random. That is really lucky for the video. So you can see here, I got a 1 LP Firestarter's Torch, even though they were different bases. So yeah, you can do that to upgrade it. But yeah, it's this is a very common item to get legendary potential on. So it's still common for me to get like a 1 to 2 LP Firestarter Torch using a Runes of Ascendance. However, getting like a 3 LP or 4 LP one, you're going to be much better off using Prophecies. So that's how I target farm them. That's the order I would target farm everything in. Hopefully that makes all sense. If you have any questions about it, though, feel free to leave a comment. I'll help you guys out, or you can drop by the stream, and I'll answer any of that stuff for you guys live. I'm totally fine with answering questions. It's kind of my thing with streaming, is I try to get to every single person's comment on the stream. So, but let me know. But that should help wrap up on how to target farm all of the pieces of gear for the build. Alrighty, guys. The next thing I want to go over is how to deterministically craft your gloves. So the main thing we're looking for on your gloves is the experimental mod that converts a percentage of your health lost as ward per second. So you can 100% guarantee that you get that mod every single time, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So the first step that you're going to need is you're going to need a Glyph of Insight. Now, Glyph of Insights do not drop on the ground. You will never just randomly drop one on there. So if you have 0, that's why. How you get a Glyph of Insight is you have to obtain an item with an experimental mod already on there. How you do that is you need to kill exiled mages. You might have seen them before through the campaign and through echoes. They're very, very common. They're it's the monster that spawns when you click on the rune prisons that are randomly scattered throughout the campaign and with echoes. You'll get one almost every single echo you do. I think it's like 70-80% chance that they spawn. So just make sure you're clicking on them. And when you kill them, they are going to guarantee drop an item as an experimental mod on it. You can see what that item is because it has this background here that has like this slash through it. And then it has a blue affix on it. So you can see that one has percentile of health currently lost per second, whatever that might be. So it'll say experimental, and then it'll be whatever it is. So that's our experimental modifier right there. So let's pretend that's not the modifier that we do already want on the build So what we will do in order to get a Glyph of Insight is you will need to obtain a Rune of Research. Those drop from the exiled mages as well. It's like a 60-70% chance that they drop when you kill them. So you should be able to get a lot of them pretty easily there. I honestly stopped picking them up. I have 239 of them. They're not rare by any means. So you need to get one of these. And then if you read the Glyph of Insight, the Rune of Research, what this does is it seals off the experimental affix. So this affix here, instead of being one of the 4 affixes on the item, it would get moved down here, and it would still be on the item, but it would allow you to add a 5th affix in its slot. The second part of the Rune of Research, if you read it, it says, when an experimental affix is sealed, you have a chance to gain a Glyph of Insight. This chance is higher for items with higher tier affixes, but cannot exceed 45%. So I have up to a 45% chance to drop a Glyph of Insight when I use a Rune of Research. So the first thing I want to do is it said it increases the odds if the tiers on the item are higher. So I'm going to go ahead and upgrade these tiers randomly to get that. You need to make sure you still have 1 forging potential left in order to use the Glyph of Insight. If I start getting too low, I'm probably going to stop. All right, so everything is as high as I can upgrade it right now because you can't upgrade the actual experimental affix. So everything's tier 5 or tier 6. I still have forging potential left. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and hit Rune of Research. When I did that, it moved the mod over here and it sealed it. However, it did not drop a Glyph of Insight. So when it does proc, because it was only a 45% chance, it will just drop directly at your feet. And that's how you will obtain a Glyph of Insight. You only need one of them. So once you can drop one Glyph of Insight, probably only take you like 3 or 4 echoes, as long as you're picking up the items off the exiled mage to obtain one. Then we can move on to the next step. So I'm going to get the pair of gloves I want. This is obviously not the best base for this build. I don't have any more because I don't even have the best base on my gloves right now. So I've been trying to craft those. But let's pretend these are all the stats that we want on the pair of gloves. And now we're just trying to get the experimental stat on our gloves. So the first thing to know is in order to use a Glyph of Insight, it's going to upgrade one of your prefixes, which is this side right here. So it says prefix at the top. It's going to change one of those stats into the experimental modifier. So it cannot be a tier 5 or a tier 6 stat. It has to be tier 1 through tier 4 because it has to have the little arrow next to it that allows you to upgrade the stat. So what we're going to do first is we're going to add a prefix. It doesn't matter what stat I choose because that stat's going to get changed anyway. So I'm just going to choose the one I have the most shards for. So I'm going to put dexterity on here. Got a critical success. Nice. All right, so I now have a prefix on here that can be upgraded with a Glyph of Insight. So that's good. So the next step I'm going to do is I have this little calculator here on lastepoch.tunklab.com. I'll put a link to this in the video description below so you guys can use it. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to fill this information out. So you're going to select gloves, make sure it's on the glove slot there. And then we're just going to go stat by stat and choose what tier we have. So our first tier on the prefix, so this is prefix number 1 tier, is tier 6, right? Because it's tier 6 intelligence. So that's already filled out correctly. Prefix number 2 is a tier 1. So I'm going to put tier 1. Now, if you look right here, this thing is going to be changing while we're changing out these affixes. Because what it's doing is it's adding all these numbers together. So 6 plus 1 plus 4 plus 3. And it's giving us that total. And that total is a seed for what it will give us. So depending on what that total is, it's going to deterministically tell us what mod we would get if we use a Glyph of Insight there. So let's fill out the rest. So we have a tier 4 suffix for our first suffix. So that we're going to change this to from a 4 to a 5. And then our second suffix is a tier 3. We're going to fill that out. And then we don't have any sealed affixes. There's no affix here. There's no affix here. So we're going to put no. So if we were to use a Glyph of Insight on our dexterity right now, it would turn into armor mitigation also applies to damage over time. That is not what we want there because that's a total of 14 tiers adding these all together. So what we're going to do is you're going to start crafting the gloves, just trying to get them perfect outside of this stat. You don't need to upgrade the dexterity. Even if this dexterity is tier 4, it's not going to give us a tier 4 experimental mod. The tier of the experimental mod is determined by the total tiers added together. So this doesn't matter at all. So completely leave this one alone unless all of these get to tier 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to upgrade my necrotic res by 1. So that just changed the total of all of our tiers added together. So now I'm going to go over to my tool, and I changed this from a tier 3 to a tier 4. You can see that changed over to ward gained on kill, ward decay threshold. That's not the stat I'm looking for yet, so I'm going to keep crafting the gloves. So let's bump up the necrotic res to tier 5. You do need to keep an eye out for critical successes, because sometimes it will give you a random upgrade on your tiers, and sometimes that can be good, sometimes that can be bad. So that changed from a tier 4 to a tier 5. So now it gives us dodge rating. Still not the stat I'm looking for. So we're going to go again. We're going to upgrade that to tier 5. All right, so now both of our suffixes are tier 5. And then boom, if you see now it says current health loss per second, % of missing health gained as ward. That's the mod I want. So I don't want to change anything else on the pair of gloves now. I don't want to upgrade anything else. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap this from a Glyph of Hope to that Glyph of Insight that we acquired from sealing off affixes. And now I'm going to upgrade my dexterity. And now you can see it gave us the percentile of health gained, or missing health gained as ward, just like the calculator told us it would. So that's how you could deterministically grab this modifier on your gear. Now, the quicker that you can get this modifier on your gear, the better, because as you can see right now, it's a tier 3, and you can't upgrade experimental modifiers. So the only way you can do it is if you are able to get it earlier before all your stats are tier 5. When you're upgrading your other stats on the gear, as long as this modifier is not sealed, and you just leave it right here, it has a chance to get a critical success, and that can upgrade its tier. So it would go like tier 3 to tier 4. So the sooner you can get on the pair of gloves, the better. The more likely you have to get the tier up higher. Also, if you want it as a tier 6 or a tier 7 modifier, those have to drop from the exiled mage themselves. So I haven't been lucky enough to get a tier 6 or tier 7 modifier on a good pair of gloves yet. But that's how you'd get like the best in slot one, would just be from farming the exiled mages. But this will at least get you a decent enough pair. So that's giving me 6% of my current health loss per second, 6% of my missing health gained as ward per second. So hopefully that helps you guys out. If you have any questions about it, though, let me know in the comments below, and I'm happy to help you guys out. Or if you want to catch me live streaming, I stream 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday. I can help you guys live with any crafting questions as well for that. But that is going to wrap up the glove crafting section. Alrighty, guys. The next thing I want to go over is how to import my loot filter, and then how to read it or have a basic understanding on what you're looking at when items are dropping on the floor. So the first thing you'll want to do is go to the video description for the YouTube video and look for where it says loot filter. And then there's going to be a paste bin link for you to click on. You're going to go ahead and open that up. And then while you're in game, you're going to click Shift F. Shift F will bring up the loot filter page. You may not have anything on here, or you may have like an old loot filter if you had already set something up yourself. What you're going to go ahead and do is you're going to click this little plus sign here, and this is going to pop open this window. After you have that popped open, you're going to go to the link that you just pulled up. It's going to look something like this. It's going to be the paste bin. It's going to have a whole bunch of context here for the loot filter. What you're going to do is you're going to start here at line 1, and you're going to highlight all of the context inside this paste bin. Once you get to the bottom here, you're going to stop it right at the end of the lines there. Don't copy any of this stuff. You're going to either click Control-C, or you're going to right-click it and click Copy. That will copy all of this to your clipboard. Once you have that set up to your clipboard, you are not going to be clicking Create New Loot Filter. You're going to be clicking Paste Clipboard Contents. What that will do is automatically import the entire loot filter. It changes the name to some random default name. You can choose whatever you would like to name the loot filter. That makes sense for you. You can choose a little icon and color for you. And then keep in mind that there is a description that will show up here. That will give you instructions later on how to create a strict loot filter from my existing loot filter. So my loot filter, it will set up to bring you from level 1 to level 100. So it's going to level with you through the campaign, and it's naturally going to start dropping off the old items that you don't care about anymore. So for example, if you look at the wand section of the loot filter, it says show wands level 1 through 4. So if I click on this rule, it is going to show me a very low base level wand. So a level 0 wand that gives me 3 spell damage on it. And it is only going to be showing this rule when my character is level 1 through 4. Once I get to level 4, these wands will no longer show on the ground for me anymore. So that's how I set it up, so that way it levels with you and you don't have to worry about constantly coming back to the video and downloading new loot filters and importing them. You can just do it all in one place. Now, everything that has a white text here is going to be for a rare item. It's not going to be for any of the exalted items, and they're going to naturally start dropping off. At the end of some of the categories, it's going to say show Endgame and then whatever type of item it is. And if there's parentheses on there, it will typically give you some instructions. So for instance, this says show Endgame Scepter. So that would be your endgame weapon that you would use if you're using a rare weapon. However, it says delete after getting Firestarter's Torch. So that is the unique weapon that we end up using for this game. So this one doesn't naturally drop off at a certain level because I want you to be able to see these weapons in case you don't have a Firestarter's Torch yet. So all you'll do is just click this little checkbox, and that will disable those items from showing. That way it's not cluttering up the ground space for you after you get your unique items. So just look through the filter as you get the different unique items to the build and make sure you're unchecking the nodes there that give you the instructions on what to do when you drop certain ones. So that's how that's set up. All of the exalted items for this build will show up as either yellow or pink. So yellow if it is a T6 modifier on that item, and pink if it is a T7 modifier on that item. Don't worry about unchecking any of the rules that are in white text, because all of those cannot be used for crafting legendaries. So once you find a good exalted item or a good unique item, you do not need any of those rules anymore. The next thing to go over is right here above the first set of exalted items. it says uncheck all rules besides the last 3 for a strict loot filter. So once you have all of your rare items at the end game, you've beaten the campaign, you're starting to equip mainly only exalted items, and you don't want to see any of the rare items on the ground anymore, what you're going to do is you're going to uncheck everything below this rule. So you're just going to go through and uncheck all of them and keep going until the very last 3 rules that don't show up as regular white rules. So these are the only ones you'll keep. So you'll uncheck everything in between there up until this point, and then you'll leave these 3 rules. What these 3 rules do is this one is what pulls all of the other gear off of the floor for you so you don't see them. This one, it'll tell you exactly what to do. So recolor, it'll show up as this blue color with an underline. This is for experimental modifier items that drop off of the exiled mages. These are necessary for crafting the gloves that I showed in the glove crafting section of the video. So if you do drop one of these items and you're not going to be using them, you're going to use a rune of research on those items to receive a glyph of insight. So it tells you exactly what to do there. For this one, it shows a recolor as red. These are where the rare shards are going to be that you need for crafting your gear. So if you need to acquire more of these, you're just going to use a rune of removal to pull those shards off the item. So that way you can use them for crafting later. So those are the only 3 rules you're going to keep. And then everything else above this you'll keep as well. So this rule is what's showing up our unique items for you. And then everything here is going to show your idols. And then it's going to specify certain base types for the exalted items. That way you're not seeing all of the exalted catalysts, because you really only care about 2 of the different subclass types, the Opulent Focus or the Chronolab. So you don't want to be seeing, a whole bunch of crystal skulls for this base, because they'll never be an upgrade for you, right? So that's what all these rules are set up to, only showing exalted items. So that's how you import the loot filter. That's how you use it and read it. That's how you transform it into an endgame filter once you've gotten very far into the game. You got into empowered monoliths and whatnot. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions on the loot filter, feel free to leave the question in the comments below, or you can catch me on the live stream, and I'm happy to go over it with you live as well. So I hope that helps you guys out. Next up, let's go over the build rotation. You guys understand how to play the build. So the first step that you're going to want to do when you start your play session, you'll only need to do this once. You'll never have to do it again in between the different echoes, unless you actually go back to the menu of the game or you exit the game and relaunch it, is you're going to, if you have both of the Cycle of Putrescence rings, is you're going to summon 2 zombies. So I've got 2 zombies summoned, and now they are just going to forever loop and do a little chain here. And summon themselves back up. So I don't need to worry about that anymore. They're going to give me a ward every single time they die, and they're going to be auto casting my Infernal Shade for you. So now I don't have to worry about these 2 buttons ever again during this play session, at least. They're going to just kind of do their own thing, and I don't have to worry about that. The next step there is you're going to want to use Transplant on cooldown. So Transplant is giving you access to your Frenzy and Haste, as well as it's activating Bone Armor as a defensive, and it's giving you mana back. So just make sure you're casting that on cooldown, so that way you can keep up all of those different buffs that it's giving you. Besides that, you're mainly just going to be throwing down Chthonic Fissure at your target, and it's going to be auto-aiming and doing its own thing. This is how you go through all of the echoes, is you just throw down fissures as you go and cast Transplant. That's pretty much it. If you are on a single target boss, the only difference is you're going to be throwing down Fissure, transplanting for mana, and then you're going to be spamming Chaos Bolts for your filler to do extra ignite damage. So that's pretty much the whole build rotation. It's very, very simple to play. It's mostly just a walking simulator with throwing down Fissure and Transplant. So hopefully that helps out with that. If you have any questions about how to maximize the gameplay, let me know. Alrighty guys, we're pretty much at the end of the video. The last thing I just wanted to cover one more time is going to be the most common questions I get asked when I was playing this build. So if there's something that you might have missed in the video, or you have a question about it, this is the timestamp. This is where you'd want to check this out, because it's probably going to answer the questions that you have. Most of the questions I received along this build were based on the changing of the skills I'm using and when to do that. I know I did go through it in the video as well, but we'll recap it here really quick. So the first thing is in the original version of the build, I am using Wandering Spirits because it gives me mana from this node right here. When are you able to drop Wandering Spirits in place of using Infernal Shade? So you can only do that once you have a Firestarter's Torch and you slam on the -3 spell mana cost at the very top. If you don't do that, you're going to be costing way too much mana with your Chaos Bolts being auto-casted, and you will not be able to sustain. So once you have a Firestarter's Torch with that slam on it, that is when you can drop Wandering Spirits in favor of Infernal Shade. Now, the other question is, when can I drop Bone Curse for Summon Volatile Zombie? That is going to happen once you at least have one cycle of Putrescence Ring. That way you're not having to constantly resummon your zombies. As you can see in the background, they're just summoning themselves over and over in an endless loop. So if you have one ring, you're going to summon one zombie, and it will continue that loop. If you have 2 rings, you can summon 2 zombies. So that's when you're going to change that. And the other question is, what is the requirement in order to switch up to the ward setup? You, at minimum, need the boots and the chest armor. So once you have these 2 uniques, even if you don't have any of the other uniques, you can set up the passive tree and exalted items for the ward setup versus the full health setup. The other items are going to help you with sustain and extra damage and whatnot, but I would at least have the Exsanguinous and the Last Steps of the Living in order to do that. Other than that, guys, that's going to wrap up the video. I appreciate you guys watching through, and hopefully you enjoyed the build if you do end up playing it. Again, if you guys have any questions about the build, or you want to come check me out and see what builds I'm working on next, check out my live streams. I live stream on both YouTube and Twitch 6 days a week. Typically starting at 10:30 a.m. Mountain Time, and my typical schedule is going till 5:30 p.m. I've been cutting those a little bit short as we're in the slow time of last epoch, just to make sure I don't burn myself out by playing a little bit too much. We'll pick up the hours again, start going back to like the 7-8 hours a day as we get closer to the new cycle. But yeah, 6 days a week, I'm normally streaming for at least like 5 hours a day. So come check me out, come talk with me. We'll go over some ideas together. I'll help you out with your builds. Whatever you guys want, I'm there to help you guys out. I'm very interactive with my community. I want you guys to enjoy your experience with Last Epoch, and that's the part of Last Epoch I enjoy, is creating these builds and being able to talk with you guys about it. So yeah, come check me out there. If you did like the video, leave it a like, and think about subscribing if you want to see more of my content, and we'll go for there. Alrighty, guys, thank you guys so much. I love all of you, and I will catch you in the next video or on the live stream.